you got famous overnight for showing that Billy Carson was lying about the Sinai Bible. Here you are lying about the Sinai Bible too.
The earliest copies that leave out the longer ending have an unusual feature. The copies of these earliest manuscripts leave deliberate blank sections, a feature we don't find them doing at the end of the other Gospels.
The top manuscript Wesley Huff uses for his argument that the gaps at the end signify that Mark should have the longer ending is, in fact, the 5th century manuscript Codex Alexandrinus that does have the longer ending. So Wesley Huff is actually throwing on the screen the manuscript with the longer ending, not even realizing that he defeated his own argument. This is not just his opinion that I disagree with. This is an objective statement that you can go and check for yourself. Here on the screen right now, here is the Codex Sinaiticus of the Acts, Luke, Matthew, Mark, John, Revelation. All the endings you just saw, all of them have a space at the end.
Where are those long endings and short endings?
Yeah, not only that, Codex Vaticanus, Mark, Matthew, John, Corinthians, Acts, Revelation, Codex Alexandrinus, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, Romans, Corinthians, Acts, Revelation, all of them have a space at the end.
Do you see what I'm saying? If it wasn't such a hidden secret, if it wasn't such a conspiracy, why make up something like that blank space as if Mark has a special blank space for its purpose to have that additional ending of theology? It's still affecting us 2,000 years later in the church. They're still haunted by the lost ending of Mark, it seems to me.
Mark, which is the oldest gospel, the scene in Mark where Jesus returns from the dead, that's not in the oldest manuscripts. In the oldest manuscripts, he doesn't come back. It literally ends tragically with the women weeping at the tomb. Then in the manuscript tradition, after the 5th century is when you start seeing verses get added to the Bible.
So this is partly true, but mostly false. What is true is that the oldest copies of the Gospel of Mark do not include the verses after chapter 16, verse 8. 16, 9 through 20 are absent from the earliest copies of Mark that we have, but that doesn't mean that Jesus' resurrection account is absent. In 16, verse 6, 2 entire verses before the cutoff of the earliest manuscripts, you still have the angel looking at the women who came to the tomb saying, "Do not be afraid, you're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is not here, he has risen."
Okay, what you just saw there was Wes Huff calling me out for what I said on Danny Jones' podcast. Wes Huff has been on my radar long before the shenanigans with Billy Carson. He's been getting famous overnight for debunking some very, in my opinion, low-hanging fruit that Billy Carson puts out there about the so-called Sinai Bible, which anyone can just go look up themselves. It's the Codex Sinaiticus. It's just a regular Christian church Bible. However, he completely misrepresents me here. So I saw a side of, I was introduced to Wes with a side, to a different side of Wes than what people are being introduced to him today. People are being introduced to him today as this heroic defender of the truth against misinformation.
Right.
However, I think Wes arguably is pushing just as much misinformation in a different way, though, than Billy Carson regarding the same text. Codex Sinaiticus, for example. Now, in this clip that you just saw, was me telling Danny Jones that he asked me a question. He said, "What's the biggest misconception about the Bible that you think is going on?" And I said, Mark's earliest gospel. Mark is the earliest gospel, and the earliest manuscripts of Mark do not have a physical return of Jesus in the flesh. It is left at the angels telling the women that he has risen.
What does that even mean that he has risen at this point, right?
Right.
Because when you read Paul, as you and I have talked to several experts, Steve Mason, James Tabor, I just had Hugo Mendez on. I'm just echoing something here to say, they don't think there's a physical bodily resurrection in Paul.
Right.
It's a replacement body or a pneumatic body. It is not flesh and blood like Luke and John later do, but that's your point is that's the conspiracy.
Right. Now, his response to me is interesting because he starts off saying this is partly true, but misleading,
mostly false.
But mostly false.
Yeah.
Now, The things that he says was mostly false, if you recall in that clip, was that the women were told that he has risen. Mm-hmm. However, he's lying. I told Danny Jones this. In the oldest manuscripts, the ones that are dated to like the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century, he doesn't come back. It literally ends tragically with the women weeping at the tomb. And the angels tell the women that he's risen, but they don't ever see him. He doesn't have to come back. So not only do I say that, not only do I say the thing that he says that I didn't say, so he completely leaves out me telling Danny Jones that the women are told by the angel that he has risen.
So this is partly true, but mostly false. You still have the angel looking at the women who came to the tomb saying, "Do not be afraid. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen."
So you see West telling his audience that I left this out as if I'm being dishonest and trying to sneak by and say the resurrection isn't implied in Mark.
So this is partly true, but mostly false.
Right.
Not only did I tell him about the angels, I even go farther. This is how fair I am. To be fair, in the Augustan period or the Flavian period, which is the 1st century,
Right.
there was an ancient trope where if this is a big trope where a hero would die, like Hercules or something, and they would go to his tomb and his body was gone, and it meant that he rose to heaven. It was an ancient trope. So whoever wrote Mark was basically saying this happened to Jesus too. So Wes lies about my take. Not only that, Wes had the audacity to make a video refuting me. I left a comment the day this video came out. As you can see on the screen right now, on the very right of him talking on Instagram is my reply, correcting him on what I said. He never responded to me. He's never acknowledged that I even responded to him. That doesn't benefit him.
Will you debate him?
Absolutely, and he won't.
Okay.
And I'm calling him out right now. I'm willing to debate you on this topic.
Any day, anytime.
Anytime. And I think you're scared. That's why. He's going to say I'm booked till 2029.
He told me he was booked
even though he can jump and do a Billy Carson debate on the spot.
Right.
But not me.
Or jump on a million apologetic channels to root around and just talk about how you kicked the dead horse on the ground, who's obviously low hanging fruit in terms of information. But your point about this trope is so ubiquitous. And we have several scholars we can name from John Dominic Crossan who are sympathetic Christian-like thinkers to those who are more, and even Del C. Allison Jr. would recognize this. Right. I mean, this is a common thing. It's only when you get apologetics that come in that you get this kind of defense. Richard C. Miller and several other academics have highlighted this trope, the translation fable. Your point, just getting into Mark again, which is super scandalous, and we see this problem as Matthew, Luke, and John and others are... Christians saw this and went, something's wrong here. This is why we get several new endings. Short ending, long ending, another ending. There's 3 endings that I know of. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, it's a bigger problem for the early Christians than we are even realizing today. At least the Christian apologists are willing to recognize. They have all these little loopholes to try and act and downplay it, bro. Right. And it's ridiculous. Your point is that, yes, it says he was risen. An angel said he's back, he's alive, he's deified. But like what the mechanics, the metaphysics of that are?
Right. I'm granting that it's being implied in 2 different ways. First of all, I blatantly say that the angels told the women that he has risen. The angels tell the women that he's risen, but they don't ever see him.
Right.
He made it seem like I didn't say that.
But mostly false. You still have the angel looking at the women who came to the tomb saying, "Do not be afraid. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen."
That's strike number 1.
That's dishonest.
Strike number 2 is I even go farther. I even go beyond that, and I start citing other tropes of the time period that Mark would have been aware of, that the audience would have been aware of, insinuating that there is some sort of resurrection happening. My point about being asked about Danny Jones, why I brought this to the table, is because most people do not know that Mark has added verses at the end. And not only that, the major point, if you actually go back to what I said and watch the Danny Jones podcast, the first thing I brought up was that Mark is older than Matthew. The reason why I brought up that Mark is older than Matthew is because the whole entire reason of me bringing this up is to me saying that the first time the story of Jesus gets told to a wide audience in Mark's gospel. In that text, there is no physical resurrection of Jesus coming back and talking to people or being touched by Thomas. My whole point is the church, all the churches today, whether it's Orthodox, Catholic, any Protestant church, the one thing that unifies them all, the main doctrine that unifies almost all Christians, is that you're almost required to believe that Jesus returned in a physical form.
Right.
If you don't believe that, you'll be labeled a heretic.
Your point, and this is exactly why you don't get into the exact mechanics of what is implied, except the lack of evidence of what kind of resurrection this is. You are admitting that in some way the angel signified he is alive again. That doesn't mean flesh and blood. It never tells us this. And anyone who goes back into Paul and analyzes this from a critical standpoint, not from a dogma, not from a creed, not from my church told me I must work backwards from John and Luke who say, touch my body and eat this fish.
Yeah, not reinterpreting a vague text and try to get the interpretation that you want. We're talking about plain readings of the text, period.
Right.
What it just if you're a caveman that can read and this text just falls to the ground from the heavens and you read it, how would you interpret? That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
There is no indication that Jesus comes back in flesh form.
Right.
Period.
Well, Paul, you could argue that in Paul too, right? So Paul's arguing something like this. Several academics we can list. Your point, to nail that down even just a step further in mentioning these other heroes, is the sign, the trope that you said is a common trope, indicates that they have become deified. They may already be gods, but like he is, because of this, now getting rewarded into this actual, like Heracles, where his body goes missing, he has now went to Mount Olympus and he is literally situated amongst the gods.
He's deified.
He's deified.
And Wes, you lied about me in this clip. You didn't show them me saying that the angels told him that he was risen.
But mostly false.
The angels tell the women that he's risen, but they don't ever see him. That's a lie. And then I responded in the comments, and you never acknowledged it. That tells me what kind of person you are. And I think with Billy Carson lying about Sinai, I think this might be some projecting going on here.
Don't need the longer ending, which I personally grant is a later addition and was not original to Mark, to still have the resurrection. The resurrection is still very much in Mark's gospel.
All of that, he just says that I was somewhat true, but mostly false. He says all of that just to end up saying, I grant that the longer ending is not. You just granted my point. So what was mostly false about what I said? Nothing.
Right.
That was a complete misdirection. And then you end up covering yourself and saying, I grant that the longer ending is in Mark. However, it's definitely there because this, that, and the third. Look, I already went over this stuff about I'm granting that Mark is insinuating some sort of deification, resurrection happening. But you just granted my entire point. So what's mostly false? Nothing.
Right. As the scholars point out, and several have said this, that the idea of having a body was like ubiquitous. This is why he's not a phantom or a ghost. He has a body, but what kind of body? And when you say resurrection, this does not necessarily imply physical flesh and blood, as you can go to other deities who have these kind of resurrections. What are the mechanics of that? They will look at the clear passages of Luke and John and go, dude ate fish, dude ate bread, says touch my wounds, meaning he's already still got this the same body, but it's become somehow immortalized.
But we can't say that Mark wrote that.
No, and
you don't have that. Mark is the first gospel. That's the whole point of me bringing that up. Mark's first. This is important. And by the way, Celsus in the middle of the 2nd century, when he's criticizing Christianity, he says that he can't believe people believe he resurrected based on, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something along the lines of, all you're going off of is 2 women at the tomb being told by an angel that he resurrected, and we're supposed to believe that? Mm-hmm. You're telling me that so this tells me that Celsus had access to Mark's original gospel.
Right.
If Celsus was reading the longer ending, why would he say that? He would never say that.
Yeah. It would. For those who don't know,
that's in the middle of the 2nd century. Right.
There's several different endings, but like in the longer ending of Mark, you're getting that beefed up theology that's later, and Wes admitted that's later, right? Your point about this is very powerful. And by the way, Mark doesn't say it's an angel. Matthew says it's an angel, but the way Matthew interpreted the young man with the linen cloth, the white robe in the tomb, is as an angel.
Right.
And maybe that was common knowledge to understand him as an angel. Either way, though, he doesn't call him that. I'm just making a point. I'm literally being pedantic.
Remember, an angel in its original context is just the word angelos, which means messenger.
Right.
So it's just a messenger showing up. Right. It could be, he can have wings, he cannot have wings. We don't know. That's all later medieval depictions of angels. But I'm just saying, like, he doesn't necessarily, he can just look like a man, and that can be an angel.
Could, yeah, and that's how Matthew interpreted it. But I just wanted to be very careful, specifically just addressing that.
No, you made a solid point. And that, like I said, middle of the 2nd century, the critics of Christianity have no knowledge of Jesus returning. To me, that's the game. That's game set.
That was one of the problems Celsus had, however you want to pronounce his name. I know that we have that.
I like Celsus.
I know you do. And it doesn't matter to me. You know, at the end of the day, we know who we're talking about. When he's critiquing Christianity, he thinks it's absurd to think that that God comes into flesh, like this theology. God is perfect. To do so would unperfect himself, if you will. But the idea even that is being described in what he's trying to push, what Wes is trying to push, seems to be what Celsus is saying. No, come back into this body. His true doctrine coming in with this Platonism is saying no.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Irenaeus is the one who preserves Celsus, and Irenaeus is one of these so-called people who fixes Mark.
And they obviously tell someone, because at the beginning of the 2nd century, we have Christian testimony that Mark is the traveling companion of Peter, who wrote down what Peter said. According to the earliest witness of those who knew the disciples of Jesus himself, Peter told Mark this story, a story that he got when the women came to Peter and told him that the tomb was empty and Jesus was resurrected.
Did his brain fall out of his skull here? What the hell? What kind of non sequitur is this? So let me get this straight, because the tradition says that Mark was the traveling companion of Peter. Eusebius also talks about this too. Eusebius says that Mark was writing his gospel in Alexandria with Peter overlooking it.
Right.
Okay. So why didn't he write it then? Why didn't he say Jesus came back in the flesh?
Right.
This is nonsense. This actually is pointing this out makes it worse.
Right.
Because it's saying Peter, the number one disciple, right-hand man of Jesus, he's raised from the dead in the book of Acts. He's the head honcho. He starts the church. He's given the keys. He feeds the lambs. He's the number one witness, and he's the one telling Mark what to write. And Mark leaves that out. Why would you even bring this up as an argument?
Well, I'll tell you why he's doing it, and you know this. And I think any viewer who's not in the apologetics necessary dogma of needing to kind of find ways to make this fit is that you're gonna want him to say, "Okay, listen. We get that ending's missing. We get that it ends on a shocking note, which you and I are totally fine with. Tragedies do this all the time. Dramas do this all the time. It's a powerful notion that the women were afraid and told no one. Like, it's a powerful theme. Well, let's make sure that the traveling companion of this guy who left this out. So the women had to have told people, because Peter's the one who told. You see what they're doing? They're trying to protect this problem at the ending of Mark. That's why they're doing it. And this problem in Mark, it threads all the way into John. It finds its way. This missing appearance of Jesus, literally not showing up and like making some stuff happen with the disciples. Matthew takes that further. He shows up on a mountain in Galilee, like Mark said, I'll meet you in Galilee. And when he does, the disciples come in and says they worshiped him and some doubted. You're in the presence of God in the flesh who resurrected physically.
Now you see why Celsus was like, what is going on with these people?
Right.
How do they, this is crazy.
Right.
They doubted a physical resurrection of a God in front of their faces. And this highlights the point. Yeah, okay, let's grant that Mark was Peter's traveling companion. Then why does he leave out the most important central doctrine of Christianity?
But that's why I'm saying he's doing it backwards. He's going,
I know.
Look, Mark, we can trust this because Peter was Mark's traveling companion, right, and he got the information, which meant the women must have told someone. Therefore, we could trust it's okay, even if it's missing that end.
But that's what I totally understand the apologetic notion of it. But it's still, at the end of the day, it still begs the question: why not just write it?
Exactly.
Why not
just
write down
put there
that this guy came back and I touched him, I saw myself. Yeah.
So I think I think another possible motive is, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, he may even be leading up to something you're going to get at that he mentions in this video, and that is actually the women did tell, just like the longer ending implies later, the women do tell the apostles, or the disciples really in this case, and so they weren't left in the dark and told no one. They actually do. So it kind of agrees with the longer endings, though they come later. And you see how he's building up? It's
all post hoc rationalization, trying to make the data fit the way you want.
Right.
And none of it refutes my original point that he said was mostly false, which then he acknowledges was true somehow. But none of it refutes my original point that text is just not there in all of the manuscripts from... We don't have any first century manuscripts,
of course,
but late the earliest second century, third century, even fourth century, even the first church Bibles.
Right.
Codex Sinaiticus, the Sinai Bible.
The Sinai Bible.
Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus. All three of those church Bibles do not have... Wait, no, I think Alexandrinus is the 5th century, the first one that does.
Okay.
But the major church Bibles from the 4th century do not have that ending.
Right.
So you're saying that all these people knew this ending, this later ending,
but they don't put it.
They don't put it in the first church Bible that's stamped approved by the Catholic Orthodox Church itself.
It makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
And it goes. This is the same guy. I watched him recently talk about the names that are attributed to the Gospels, which it would no skin off anyone's back if a guy named Mark wrote a Gospel, if a guy named John wrote a Gospel, if a guy named Matthew wrote a Gospel. None of that even matters at the end of the day on the ontological claims. They do it to try and build their confidence because it's such shoddy evidence. This is such a problem.
That's another problem with what him saying that Mark was the traveling companion of Peter.
Right.
And that you just brought up a really good, solid point. The overwhelming consensus in scholarship, even among Christian believers who are honestly having methodology and being honest with the data, they all acknowledge that we don't know who wrote these 4 Gospels, and the names get added at the end of the 2nd century.
Right. Well, even if you grant,
but that's what I'm saying. We can still grant it, but we have to bring that up because you're jumping to this conclusion that Peter was traveling with Mark. But we just don't know that. You're just going off random tradition.
M. David Litwood called that not hagiography, but the early church mythology about crafting narratives.
Right.
And oftentimes, even in some of these forged... So, for example, I may not get this 100% correct, but in one of the letters that is attributed to Peter, there's a guy named Mark.
Peter, in his own epistle, even mentions a Mark that could potentially be the Mark who wrote the Gospel.
That was perfect timing when you just brought that up.
What are the odds?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, just to comment on that, and I'm no expert specifically knowing this inside out like M. David Litwood would. This forged letter, he does not look at as forged, which is odd when you're a textual critic on that level, how you wouldn't actually see the arguments.
Right.
You're the PhD up and coming.
Marcion's epistles doesn't have it.
Right.
But that's one point aside. But it also aligns with the overwhelming scholarly consensus today.
Right.
In academia,
this is a forge.
That this is not a part of any of the authentic letters, not just of Paul, but outside of Paul. This is a forged later text to sort of fix these issues.
I'm glad he mentioned Mark because Mark.
And by the way, another thing too, he doesn't say this is Mark, the one who wrote the glorious gospel.
Right.
The writer of the glorious gospel, Mark, says.
Right.
He doesn't say that.
No, and that's But
then again, that would be after. If this was Peter. Then again, Mark would have written this after, probably, so he wouldn't have said that. Okay, maybe I'm wrong about that.
Either way, this forged letter, according to Litwa, is that he's saying church fathers who are someone's crafting this First Peter for reasons.
And they say 2nd century. This is a 2nd century text.
This is a 2nd century text, and they're crafting this First Peter, and this character Mark in it gets plugged into the Gospel Mark. Now you can see how you have Peter and a companion, so they're crafting this companionship connections. All mythological connections in competing with other versions of Christianity. Because remember, who is the OG of Valentinian theology?
Valentine.
Paul.
That's true.
Paul.
Yeah.
Well, I thought Paul's the Orthodox Jew.
Valentinus, Marcion, all these so-called heretic Gnostics, they all love Paul.
What's up with that,
They're all Pauline.
Do they have their own stuff that we might not have that we've lost because they haven't continued the tradition by writing their materials or have discarded and burnt them? And that happened. Book burning happened.
You can tell which epistles are later forgeries because they had this anti-Gnostic rhetoric going on that you don't find in the 7 authentic epistles of Paul. You don't get that stuff. Then you get like in Timothy, for example, there's this whole entire importance of the bishops over divine revelation and how gnosis isn't good and faith is better. That's all. You could tell which of these are middle 2nd century texts.
Right. And that's, I think, just if you take his angle, this is evidence for a companion named Mark in a letter by a guy who we believe wrote this.
We know that he knows better than that.
Well, he should. He's
trained to know that this is not.
But he's trained to do apologetics too, and that's something you and I have noticed.
That's what we're trying to bring forth in this video.
And this fact about the ending of Mark's Gospel is not a secret. If you look at any modern English translation of the Bible, you will find this very detail pointed out very publicly. This is not hidden or covered up because the Bible will tell you.
Yeah. He completely lies about me again. Second time in this video. Never, ever in that whole podcast did I ever say this was hidden or covered up or some secret. In fact, let's just hear my own words on this.
Yeah. As they were reclining at the table and he rebuked that. That's not in the oldest manuscripts. That's added.
That's added.
All of that stuff. And this is consensus. Any Bible scholar will agree with me on this. This is not some wild.
Is there a way to access online the original?
Yes.
And now when
look, it says it right there. Some of the earliest manuscripts do not include 9 through 20.
No way.
I'm sorry. I said 21 verses. I'm sorry. It's 11 verses. My bad.
11. Okay.
Yeah, those last 11 verses.
They don't include 16, 9 through 20.
And this is Bible.com that's saying that. And this is not a crazy. This is not like some war.
So they don't include this one right here.
Yeah,
now when he rose early.
Did you see how clear I was on how this is not hidden? I said this is the overwhelming scholarly consensus. It's on Bible.com. This is not a crazy thing. I think that was enough. Me acknowledging none of this. I never once said this is secret. This is covered up. This is hidden. Right. I made it blatantly clear that this is out in the open and that everyone agrees on this. But what did Wes say about me? That there's no evidence.
This isn't covered up. This isn't a secret. This isn't a conspiracy.
So he's making me into a straw man.
I want to give a little pushback here. And the pushback isn't 100%. It's in line with what you just said. But there is a cover up. Okay, and I'm not saying as a cover up as if we are like they're not going to factually admit. Wes is quick to notice, and he should be if he's being honest, that clearly it's not in the earliest manuscripts, and that's what you said. But why are they adding to this gospel?
Exactly.
This is not a Joe Blow little basic thing. He'll probably play it onto it and go, well,
11 verses that have the physical resurrection of Jesus added to the oldest gospel.
Right.
It is kind of a cover-up.
Kind of something's going on.
My thing is, it's not secret to the world right now.
No. Everyone should know this.
He made it seem like I was saying that.
No.
He's lying about me.
Yeah, I think
But you're making a great point. Even though that's the case, on the other hand, the church did go out of their way to try to fix this issue in Mark.
Well, think about this, too. This is why it's a bit of a conspiracy of what Christians might be doing, because if all we had in the textual traditions of the manuscripts and whatnot that we find, if all we had was a long ending or a short ending, we have multiple variations of endings too. So this is more scandalous than just one.
Right.
You have multiple. Now I understand they're going to go, you're going to take the worst interpretation and not try to explain this in some very, very gentle approach to why. If I read Mark with all the theology I see in Matthew, Luke, and John, and then church dogma and all of that, and I see creeds, and I read Mark, as James Tabor takes us through the course, I would walk away with that going, there better be more. There better be more. Because if all I had is that gospel, I got a problem, dude.
And then what's so crazy about this, like, I want the audience to wrap your head around this. We look back at the ancient world and we're like, 500 AD, it seems closer to 100 AD. Imagine now imagine how far away we are now to the 1600s, right, before America even existed.
Exactly.
This is how Mark gets written in 70, around there, whatever. 70.
Whenever. Could be later, but yeah, could be earlier, they say.
170, 100 years. 270, 200 years. 370, 300 years. And then in the 5th century, almost half of a millennium almost half of a millennium later, does Mark finally get fixed in the recorded manuscripts that we have.
Right.
That is profound.
You already know what they're going to do. But Justin Martyr quotes him. But Hippolytus says. But Irenaeus says. And in every example. He's going to bring that up. But I just want to say this for the audience, because this is important to get them ready. Every single damn time we do this with apologists, they always find a wiggle room. And if you go to every single one of those examples, they're willing to bend. They'll let something that's vague or general or something, and they'll let that connect to somehow prove the point. No, when you go and look at each one of these examples carefully, you're not walking away going, yeah, that's a definite quote directly from the ending of Mark, the long ending of Mark or something. Right. It's a general thing. And
it's they're not looking at the issue at hand. They're immediately going, oh, that's a problem. Well, what can we find? We got to find something. Yeah. They're immediately looking around.
Yeah, we got to keep our tower.
Instead of just being like, wow, you're right. Good point.
Yeah.
They got to do something about it.
Because these are the same people who are making the historical agenda. They believe it's evidenced, it's provable, and anyone who doesn't believe this, honestly, either has sin blocking them from being able to come to the conclusion, or ignorance, and they're purposely not realizing the facts are on their side. Listen, dude, the day they just go ahead and say, it's faith. I'm not even able to make a serious, strong case. Right. Like I am persuaded and believe these letters. I believe these books. And I have faith. Cool. You try to make the case, I have the empirical data on my end, the facts are on me. Like, that's where I'm going to start pulling out.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
The earliest copies that leave out the longer ending have an unusual feature. The copies of these earliest manuscripts leave deliberate blank sections, a feature we don't find them doing at the end of the other Gospels. This is an indication that the scribes appear to have been aware of further material after verse 8, but themselves decided not to include it. Instead, they leave a space in case their decision turned out to be incorrect, and a later scribe could add it. This means that further text beyond the end of verse 8 was at least known in copies prior to these earliest surviving examples. And we know this evidence exists.
We know this evidence exists, he says. That was a Billy Carson level bull crap lie. And it's funny, the funny part about it is he's talking about the Codex Sinaiticus right now.
According to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus?
And
the Sinai
Bible that Billy Carson was lying about, Wes Huff is also blatantly lying about. This is not just his opinion that I disagree with. This is an objective statement that you can go and check for yourself. Here on the screen right now, here is the Codex Sinaiticus of the Acts, Luke, Matthew, Mark, John, Revelation. All the endings you just saw, all of them have a space at the end.
Where are those long endings and short endings?
Yeah, not only that, Codex Vaticanus, Mark, Matthew, John, Corinthians, Acts, Revelation. All of them have a spacing at the end. Codex Alexandrinus. As I was going through and adding the manuscripts to the video, I realized that the top manuscript Wesley Huff uses for his argument that the gaps at the end signify that Mark should have the longer ending blew my mind to find out that the top one is, in fact, the 5th century manuscript Codex Alexandrinus that does have the longer ending. So Wesley Huff is actually throwing on the screen the manuscript with the longer ending that has the longest gap out of all of them, not even realizing that he defeated his own argument by showing that the manuscript that does have the longer ending has an even bigger gap at the end, defeating the purpose of this argument to begin with. Codex Alexandrinus, Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, Romans, Corinthians, Acts, Revelation, all of them have a space at the end.
Do you see what I'm saying? If it wasn't such a hidden secret, if it wasn't such a conspiracy, why make up something like that blank space as if Mark has a special blank space for its purpose to have that additional ending of theology? It's still affecting us 2,000 years later in the church. They're still haunted by the lost ending of Mark, it seems to me.
This is your field. This is this field that Wes talks about. In fact, in another podcast that he did with Julian Dory, he shows him how to find manuscripts.
So there's a document called Codex Sinaiticus that's at the British Library right
what's
now.
This?
So this is one of our earliest examples of what we would consider a Bible. So before this, you had individual books, but they're independent largely. So they're specific manuscripts. And there's a categorization system for this. In fact, if you look up csntm.org.
CSN as in Nancy?
Yeah.
NTM?
Yeah. So that's the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts. So this is done by Dan Wallace. So if you click Digital Manuscript Collection, what you can actually do is you can go over to the classification on the left-hand side, go down, click Papyrus, and then say start in 2nd century and in 3rd century. And then you can even scroll down and be a little bit more choosy. So you can say, I just want, so you go, let's say the book of, go to the second one, P66, 2nd, 3rd century. So this is a copy of the Gospel of John.
Whoa.
And so this is what they would have looked like. So this is one of our earliest examples of a cover to cover. I actually have a full facsimile of this in my office that I do academic work on. So in my doctoral work, in my PhD research, what I do is I study scribal habits, and I study what are called paratextual features.
You study scribal habits.
Yeah, ancient scribal habits is my area of expertise.
What does that mean?
So you can just see right there. He knows how to go on these websites. He knows how to look up these manuscripts. He even shows on the screen 3 of the manuscripts that have Mark. He shows the 3 major church Bibles. And the ones that I'm showing you right now are from those exact same Bibles. And they all have blanks at the end of every single gospel.
So that's...
You just pulled a Billy Carson level lie right in front of your whole entire audience. In fact, if I was your audience, I would feel disrespected about this.
This is a big, I mean, of course they're not. They're also in with needing to keep the tower going. Most of them, unless they're actually being honest with this material. Because like you said, in these same Bibles that he's only wanting to highlight Mark, where are all those other texts with these blank spaces at the end? Why? What kind of move
you would think if he wanted to really slam this point home, because this is how you know he's being dishonest. He went and found those images of those manuscripts from the same website that we're looking at right now. That means that he had to, when he made the claim that other gospels don't have these gaps.
Copies of these earliest manuscripts leave deliberate blank sections, a feature we don't find them doing at the end of the other gospels.
That means he could have checked, found that they didn't, showed it on the screen, and he would have looked like a genius. Oh my God, he's right. They don't have a gap. Why didn't he do that? Because those gaps exist, and he's lying.
So let's make a reason to defend why we're missing that longer ending. Yep. Whether it's a shorter longer ending or a longer ending, because there's various endings.
You got famous overnight for showing that Billy Carson was lying about the Sinai Bible. Here you are lying about the Sinai Bible too.
That's so freaking wild. But you know what's sad? I maybe this will blow up, and it needs to, because that's why I wanted to have conversations with him to dive deeper in his confidence. These ideas that he's putting out there, like even when I looked at Billy, I caught some crap for saying, nope, actually I think Billy's right about that, God being a male. And why is he identified as a male? You're anachronistically pushing your philosophy onto this deity, which is just like other ancient Near Eastern deities. And like, there's things that Billy did a terrible job of even trying to represent, and then some stuff was just so wacky. I'm like, Wes, you're right. But this is a blatant lie while he's out here pointing out someone's lying.
Because the 2nd century writer, Irenaeus, quotes what appears to be part of Mark chapter 16, verses 19. Justin Martyr also seems to have quoted Mark 16:20. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, Hippolytus, Vincentius of Thebaris, Epiphanes, and Ambrose all allude to, quote, or paraphrase part of Mark 16:9-20.
The oldest one out of all of those is Justin Martyr. So let me just get this one off the bat. Justin Martyr does not cite the longer ending of Mark. He made a stretch in the evidence on this one. Here's what Justin Martyr actually says. That which he says, he shall send to thee the rod of power out of Jerusalem.
there's no rod of power in Mark, is predictive of the mighty word, which mighty logos, which is Johannine, by the way, which his apostles going forth from Jerusalem preached everywhere. So Mark 16 does say went forth. It says exultantes ekerixon pantaku. Okay, what does that say? Went forth preaching everywhere. So you found the word preached everywhere and is in common with one little sentence, not even the whole sentence, 2 words. The 2 words, which is exultantes ekerixon. You took those 2 words and you found those 2 words happened to line up with something that Justin Martyr said, and you call that a citation? A citation looks like this. As Mark says in the gospel, and then you word for word citation.
Right.
He doesn't mention Mark in that passage. He just vaguely talks about the preaching of the apostles, which everyone is well known about. All the other gospels mention this.
Right.
Luke mentions this. How do you know he's not citing Luke here? He just wants him to be citing Mark because that would make the long ending of Mark exist in the 2nd century, but it doesn't.
So I was digging into, and I found with you, Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ, that was written by Dr. Richard Carrier. And Dr. Richard Carrier brings receipts as well as other academics who are arguing this case. And I recommend anyone who's actually curious in diving into every single one of these apologetic characters that they're bringing up in history, Hippolytus, Epiphanes, or what did he say?
I forgot what
he said. Something, it wasn't that. I know that. But he goes in and says, that is important because there's an apologetic maneuver that goes like this. This is Dr. Carrier already recognizing this. In 2013, the famous Christian scholar Craig Evans wrote, quote, Mark 16:19, then after speaking to them, the Lord Jesus was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God, in quote, that phrase from the gospel, is quoted in, and this is still Craig Evans, is quoted in Irenaeus against heresies 3:10:5. But this is uncertain testimony. The original Greek text of this part of against heresies has not survived.
That's a big red flag.
It survives in a later Latin translation that may have incorporated this verse from much later manuscripts.
I was just talking to Nothath yesterday about this, how it is so common for zealous Christian scribes in the medieval period to go back and fix the things they don't like.
That's
so
100%.
When you find a late manuscript that's a translation of an original text,
right,
do not ever accept this as the original, ever.
Bingo. And he says, accordingly, it is far from certain that Irenaeus, writing circa 180, was acquainted with Mark's so-called longer ending. In quote. Holman's apologetic commentary response. So Carrier agrees and then goes even a little bit further in arguing a step beyond what Craig's arguing here, because he goes deep into it, hunting down the sources. And he said that it looks to him that this longer ending of Mark may even come from a commentary by a Christian that we don't even have his book anymore, that gets left in the margin of the empty space in that text. Right. So what the hell?
And that brings us. Those are the 2 2nd century sources that Wes cited: Irenaeus, Justin Martyr. Now we knock those 2 off as either later forgeries or it's just not a citation at all, and you're just making things up. That brings us to the next section where he mentions a bunch of 3rd century authors. Do you notice how Wes carefully worded himself? He says we have a whole slew of these authors who
quote
allude to. No, he doesn't say quote.
He doesn't say quote.
He does not say quote.
Okay.
He goes, they allude to or paraphrase what we find. If you check every single one that he mentions, none of them quote or cite from Mark. They all say things that sound like it could be from Mark. It also could be from Luke. So he's very dishonest in how he. By the way, another thing. Why don't you show the citations? Why didn't Wes? He wants to make this point. He wants to prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Show the citations of these 3rd century.
Make your case.
Make your case. But why do you just? We're just left to take your word for it that they paraphrased it. They alluded to it. Well, guess what? That's not enough for me. And not only that, let's grant. All of these things are there. Let's grant all of them are citing the longer Mark. Then why doesn't Mark have a manuscript to provide this? Why isn't there any manuscript that backs up any of these citations from these so-called 3rd century and even 2nd century authors that are citing the longer Mark? Why is it that only until the 5th century do we get this longer? It does not make any sense. So even if we grant that these other authors in the 3rd and 2nd century are quoting from some other lost Mark that we don't find until the 5th century, the point still remains that the first time Mark was told to an audience, there is no physical, fleshly return of Jesus where he comes and talks to people. That does not exist. That was the whole point in the first place.
If I was a Christian arguing about this, I'd go, yeah, so what? I think later on, scribes and Christians saw this and were like, hold on, we already believed there was already a consistent view that they believed he came back in the flesh in some way, but it was immortalized. He'd become deified, but it's flesh and blood, or really the terms Luke uses, flesh and bone. He's in the same body. We're just working backwards. And I see them do this already with Paul. So why aren't they just going, the reason why Christians and scribes just added it in there, and they did add it in there, is because, some people were mistaken, or throughout church history, they had doubts and wondered, like, hold on, what's this? Because we had too many heresies running around, and we didn't want them to get confused, so they just added it in there. But truth is, it was never in there, and we could see why they added it in there, because they had problems.
Right.
That's honesty, but instead, you're playing games 2,000 years later. The other thing is, I want to mention one thing before we move forward, is this. If you bring up Bart Ehrman, who will agree with this complex, difficult issue. Yeah. And he is a bona fide PhD in this area of textual criticism. I could probably get him on to do an actual episode discussing this very issue and see what he has to say about this. And might need to make that happen, Neil. Remind me. Yeah. But at the end of the day, when I bring him up, as long as it's cool and it agrees with someone like Wes, the majority of Christian audience...
They love to cite Bart.
Hey, Bart Ehrman agrees with us. Soon as a Bart Ehrman will say something they're not going to like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Bart Ehrman's wrong, da-da-da-da-da. Well, that same kind of immediate dismissal happens with Richard Carrier, and I'm sick of it. I think if someone's right, someone's on the right track, and they contribute something good, you need to pay attention, consider the arguments, and listen to them. That's why I've always stood with trying to be as neutral as possible and try to take as much as I can from many people like Dr. Carrier. And I just want to step in front of that and say, you're going to tell me while you listen to William Lane Craig or someone else tell you about something, and you're going to tell me this guy who's literally trying his best, looking at the evidence, agree or disagree with him, that I shouldn't take this guy serious? That's the nonsense. I'm tired of that. You see what I'm saying?
It's Michael Jones level apologetics. Wes is just better at it than Michael Jones is. I'll give him that. Wes is better at the Michael Jones style content than he does a better job. But he's doing the same style that Michael Jones is. I'm just going to cite everything that agrees with me and discard everything that doesn't agree with me, and that's how I'm going to roll.
Now, I personally don't think that means that Mark wrote past verse 8, but to act as if this is some sort of secret and that it was added to Mark's gospel centuries after for some sort of hidden reason, or that it was completely unknown before those copies that we have that end up including it in the 5th century, is just being dishonest with the ancient data and ignores the open transparency that modern translations state.
So once again, he completely lies about my position. I never once said it was secret. And it's the funny part is all he says all that bull crap just to say, I personally grant that the oldest manuscripts of Mark don't have this.
Right.
So we agree. So you just admitted that I'm 100% correct. All the other stuff is just jargon because I didn't make those claims.
Right.
I never said it was secret or unknown or hidden or some sort of conspiracy. I was very open about it in those clips that we saw. I was and I even went out of my way. To tell Danny Jones's audience about the tropes in the 1st century about heroes that die and their bodies are missing.
Right.
So you misrepresented me, blatantly lied about what I said,
and said you were dishonest,
and said I was dishonest.
Right.
When you were the one who's dishonest,
without a doubt.
And then at the same time agreed with me and acknowledged that Mark's earliest manuscripts don't have, and so you basically acknowledged that I'm right, but just made it seem like I was dishonest just to get a video out of me.
Well, again, and remember now, he just made this case that all these other people are referencing it as if it's been floating around before the actual Gospels, and your point still stands.
Yeah.
Why aren't they in them then?
Right.
You wouldn't have people floating around quoting a non-existent...
And they're not quoting, too. They're just saying things
yeah.
that are similar, and people like Wes are going around looking for
ways...
something that sounds like the ending of Mark, and going, he cited Mark,
right.
Even though none of them are saying that.
Right.
So...
That's odd, because if...
And then the Irenaeus one where he does actually says Mark's gospel, he does actually reference. That's the one that turns out to be an interpolation.
It looks
based
like
on
it's
the
Latin.
evidence.
Latin later.
Yeah.
You can't trust.
It's a classic example, like Josephus's passage. There's ways you can tell when things are forward. Wes knows this.
Yeah.
Wes knows the methodology.
Yeah.
About behind how to tell when things are added by different authors. This looks like a classic example because it's so crispy clear on saying, oh, and by the way, Mark says that the angels came and then Jesus returned and then he came back in the flesh. It's like you can tell.
Well, Dr.
This
Carrier,
is being inserted.
You remember how I told you that Craig Evans makes this position and it looks like it could be, but not high confident. Dr. Carrier points out that it looks, in his view, that it was a mistaken interpolation, but it was an interpolation that they had inserted, and he gives his cause in his book, Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ. Point is, if anything, it's how are you going to trust this late Latin stuff to tell you what the early
point
Greek...
is, it's on shaky grounds if it is there.
Yeah.
So that's all.
And as you point, Christians did play a lot with these texts to shape up and clean up. And
this is not something we're making up to try to make sure to try to say, like we're just making up our own little argument to get it out of the way.
No.
This is something that's well known that scribes do these things, especially when they're translating from Greek into Latin.
I just want to say something for anyone who goes, see how resistant you guys are because we're not buying in the crap. You could grant, we could both grant all four Gospels. This is not even on the table. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make an absurd claim and say all four Gospels, including the long ending of Mark. I wouldn't care if they were written in the first century and we had evidence of all of them in the first century, some manuscript or papyri, just like the Quran. If we could say the Quran goes right back to the prophet. Christians, question, does that then make you trust the Quran and its divineness and its words? Why aren't you swayed if it is early, granting the Quran's within a decade or two from the prophet? You're not moved by it the same way we're not moved by it. The problem is the evidence is that shoddy in terms of you got way later stuff. You've got these added things. So don't play the games with us.
That's why I said, even if we grant Irenaeus did write this, we still, as Wes admitted, it still wasn't told the first time by Mark, who's the first gospel. The first time the Christian story gets told to anybody in a wider audience outside of Paul's letters, the first time the story gets told, there is no physical return of Jesus where he comes back and talks to people and does anything on planet Earth.
They do that later, and that is the thing that scholars are highlighting was a problem.
Right.
They needed a Matthew. They needed a Luke. They needed a John version that gives you more detail, clarifies it.
And like Celsus is a prime example. We brought him up. He's pointing out these discrepancies, and they need to fix that, and they do.
Well, let me ask you a question, Neil. Are these cleverly devised myths?
Yeah.
Okay, Celsus thought so as well. Well, when we get into Peter, which really isn't Peter according to academics, right? It's forged. He says these are not cleverly devised myths, as some would suppose. Well, who thinks these are cleverly devised myths? M. David Litwell says Celsus. He thinks these are cleverly devised myths, and I imagine he's not the only guy on the block, but he has read them and thinks these are cleverly devised myths. Now, the question is, where are those voices? I want more of those voices. I'm just making the point, man. When we read this stuff, the reason that they're adding is your point. Marcianism, Valentinianism, having Celsus come in and compete and argue against this whole thing. They're trying to fix and change stuff in these later Gospels. And as he said, he admits, he goes, I agree. It ended at verse 8. I don't go to 9 through 21. I don't do all that. That's fine. But we do have early voices that echo it. We do have, why are you even saying that? Especially if you don't have quotes of it. And then when you say Irenaeus, why aren't you mentioning that the Latin, it's later and it's very questionable to know that this goes, be more nuanced and scholarly.
Bring the nuance to the table and then say, this is why I think this is a real text. And then we're cool. But as long as you're not disrespecting your audience and leaving out these nuances, that's the Michael Jones level stuff that I'm seeing in Wes.
Well, look at how immediately
you're just granting all these things as if they're all fact, and no one disagrees, and it's really apologetic bullshit.
Well, you pointed it out. If Irenaeus does mention this, if we granted these possible voices mention it, why is it that we have the manuscripts missing it?
Right, it just doesn't
now
make
you got
sense.
Another question.
And that's where common sense comes in, and you're just like, Occam's razor just says, dude, the manuscripts don't have it. until the 5th, man. Stop playing all these games with these citations.
Yeah.
Then bring the evidence, man. And so, like, at the end of the day, the whole reason why I wanted to go through this video is it's not even about me disagreeing with him about these authors, but it's the point is you lied about what I said in the video. I never said it was secret. You said I said it was secret. You lied. You also told your audience that this was partially true but mostly false.
What's
you
mostly
didn't provide
false?
anything. You didn't provide anything that I said that was false. Not one thing that I say in that video did you point out that I said that was ended up being false. So I think what do you? He owes me an apology. If
He
anything,
needs to show up at your door at 2:30 in the morning
Or
and
debate
ask
me
for
on
you
this
to
stuff.
remove the video. He's going to send legal document. I'm kidding.
But yeah, I didn't do that. I actually replied to him, and I was actually very, very upfront and polite with him. I still respect Wes's grind.
Yeah.
And I would love to have a debate with him, a discussion with him. Like I said, I don't think he wants that smoke. So I'm putting it out there for you that we can debate this very topic. And we could do it on Myth Vision, we could do it on Danny Jones, we can do it on Julian Dory. You can choose a Christian channel to be the host and moderator. And this very topic, I feel strong that you're wrong and I'm correct. And I think you know that I'm correct. You just wanted to make it seem like I was incorrect for whatever reason.
I'll tell you my motive. If I'm going into motives, and we're not supposed to do that because it gets us into trouble. But hey, I don't have a problem possibly psychoanalyzing. This is before he blew up in terms of getting the Billy stuff. He saw you on Danny Jones. I know he's been wanting to get on Danny Jones.
I think it's getting close to 1 million views right now.
He wants that attention. He's wanting to grow. Who doesn't want to grow? I want attention. I'm not ashamed of that. I want to grow. I want to go viral.
That was a cheap trick, though.
But it was a cheap trick. I think he saw you as someone who is clearly tight with a big YouTuber. He's trying to get into the whole Joe Rogan sphere, trying to get in tied with these guys. And he saw you and was like, let me try to hit this guy, get Danny's attention.
Hopefully my audience will be dumb enough to think that I'm correct and they won't check into what I'm saying. Like the manuscript thing. Showing those 3 manuscripts on the screen with blank endings at the end. Anyone can go check and look and see. They all have that.
Yeah, are they all doing this?
Right. Do they all have secret endings that we don't know about?
That's what I'm saying. It's absurd. And again, on that point, we know through the grapevine he was wanting that clout to go and engage with Amon Hillman. We know he was wanting that clout. He's been wanting that clout with some of these guys that have shown up on Danny Jones's thing. That's my reason I think he was motivated to do it. And when he said my biggest critique is mostly dishonest, he said, or mostly wrong.
He could have said this is mostly true, but here's why I think it's a little misleading or something. Yeah,
but that's not going to get you.
But he did the opposite of that.
That's not going to get you views.
Somewhat true, but mostly false. And I'm still waiting to find out what I said in this video that is even somewhat false.
Right. Help me out.
I was very careful in that segment.
Even in this discussion now, with what we're saying, help us out in seeing what we're saying here. Prove us wrong. Give us the facts because we're interested. I really am interested to hear. Honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. He can get vague, possible.
I'm going to give you my prediction. If he does respond, I highly doubt he will. Because he has nothing to gain from jumping in the ring with us. We have, he's only going to expose his audience to these nuances that he doesn't want them to see.
He wants them only to have their story.
Right. You and I don't care about the nuances. We like the nuances. That's where
we
live.
Yeah.
But
I talked to Kip Davis yesterday, Dr. Kip Davis, who specializes on Dead Sea Scrolls, and he said when a scribe leaves a small section blank, oftentimes it's because there's a damaged manuscript they're working off of before. And if you wanted to play into that, we were hypothesizing because you and me can live in the ambiguity.
I want to make sure I get the nuances.
Let's play a few games here. First of all, I have some questions for you. I want to hear your response. First things first. All right, if we played that game that Mark's missing the ending because there was an earlier manuscript that was so damaged at the end, they had no way to copy, and now we have nothing but a blank ending for so long, right? That's kind of odd in my view because we don't see that anywhere else. Why is it that the special case of these long endings doesn't show up in Acts, at the end of Acts, the end of Revelation, the end of Mark, Matthew, Luke? It ends up on Mark, but this is the only example I'm aware of where several new alternative endings are taking place for this gospel. I'm asking the question, Neil, why this text? And when you read it contextually, it is scandalous. It's not like a random text that has this sufficient ending that works and nobody's going to go, oh, they told no one. It's not like that. This is scandalous sounding at the end. and they're adding endings that are different.
Right.
Give me the other New Testament canonical texts that do that.
Right.
Do you understand why our case is so strong? Yeah. I hope, Wes, you're paying... Like, this is why it's so strong. It's scandalous. It is. Even no secret. There's no hiddenness. It's there. Yep. Everyone knows it, but it's still scandalous.
And that was a great point, by the way. But that, to me, Wes, that was bad. You telling your audience that this is the only gospel that has a gap at the end... When you look, I know for a fact that you saw this because you used that website in Julian Dory's podcast. You know how to look up manuscripts. This is what you do. This is what you're studying. That means you knew that all these other gospels, and not even just the gospels, the epistles, even Old Testament manuscripts, have this gap at the end because scribes don't plan out how many words. First of all, they don't start from the back and work to the front. When the story ends, that's the end of the page.
You mean you can't expand your font to fit the page? Right. Oh, man.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, this idea that none of these other gospels have this is nonsense. And as I'm showing on this right now, even the bigger gaps that maybe you want to use that bigger gap as an example. There's other examples of other texts having that bigger gap. So that argument's dead in the water.
Yeah. I was reading Hitler Homer Bible Cries 2, and he mentions this, that in the manuscript tradition, obviously, Dr. Carrier went and looked at them and realized, based on the font size, based on the lettering, and how much room is left in between that gap, the longer ending will not fit. So you can discredit the longer ending.
That's even crazy.
It will not fit. Yes, he went in and did the measurements and saw, because Kip does this stuff, right? And Kip and me will go back and forth, and he'll go, hold on. First of all, we can tell, even with fragments, based on the size of the font, based on the idea of the text itself, we can kind of calculate and figure out.
Yeah,
dude, it would not fit.
The scribe writes his signature at the end, and make sure it ends here.
Right.
If he wanted to leave a gap, he could have left the gap and then signed the bottom with the gap there.
Right.
But he doesn't.
He doesn't.
The text literally ends like there's no other way to describe it. The text is over. That's it. There's no gap there.
And I just, again, think your point was this is scandalous. Not that it's secret. Not that no one knows.
Not that no one knows.
That this is a pretty big deal that Jesus doesn't show up and go, check me out. Like, you can't get the mechanics, the metaphysics out of Mark.
Yeah, he lied about me. That was a lie. Like, I don't know how you can, I'm trying to steal a man, like, maybe he thought I was wrong or he disagrees with what I said. He lied about what I said in that video. So... You can always apologize, Wes, and it could be all good. I know this. We get passionate and we like to stretch things a little bit. It happens. So, by the way, this is a Christmas video. So that was a nice little just to get you warmed up on who Wes really is. Now let's get into his Christmas. Let's get into some of the Christmas stuff.
Time to switch gears. Yeah. We're going to Santa Claus,
Part 2,
baby.
B-side.
3 years ago, I made an infographic on some reading I'd done on supposed pagan origins of Christmas. At the start of the research, I would have told you that some of these things were pagan, and that Christians had co-opted a number of them, and that while their origins might have been pagan, they were now completely disassociated from their pagan beginnings. However, as I read more and dug into the literature, and specifically the original sources, I found that my preconceived notion was actually backwards. In fact, some of the things I thought had pagan inceptions were actually practiced by Christians before they were by pagans, and pagans had appropriated them from Christians, not the other way around.
All right, so this is his little introduction on Christmas. He's basically saying, I acknowledge that some of this stuff was culturally, in the cultural milieu, and Christians adopted it, which is... And then he basically points out that then I figured out the apologetic, the move here. Now I know what to say, and I'm about to give you that.
Oh, and he came with that authority in the original sources.
Which he never cites.
Right.
In that clip right there, did he ever say, oh, this text by Seneca where he mentions Saturnalia and gift giving, actually it doesn't exist. Or how about in Catullus or Macrobius is later. Let me see. Cicero, Martial. All these are all first century authors that mentioned the Saturnalia. Did he ever bring those up? Nope. But he just tells you flat out, when I looked at the sources, they weren't there.
Right. And for me, just my walk away, this is the first time I'm seeing this, it brings this authority of a trust me, bro. Because what happens is he goes, look, I came into this, I'm a Christian, and I thought pagan origins. No sweat off my back, water off a duck, okay?
Right.
We are good. I have no problem with that. You ladies and gentlemen watching me right now, it wouldn't bother me if that's the case. But the evidence just so happened to be on my side at the end of the day, where actually it was the other way around. And those damn pagans, man, they had to borrow from the Christians in this respect. So you can see it leading up somewhere.
And now he's going to get into his arguments, and every single one of these is bonkers.
The leading contender for this argument is the Roman festival of Sol Invictus, the festival of the unconquered sun. It's not until the middle of the 4th century that anyone makes the connection of Sol Invictus to December 25th, and earlier inscriptions are inconsistent, placing Sol Invictus throughout August, October, and early December.
Oh my God. This is so painful to watch. First of all, did you forget who Aurelian is? Aurelian dedicates a temple to Sol Invictus in 274. He just made the claim in that clip that there are no sources of anyone linking Sol Invictus to December 25th until the middle of the 4th century.
Right.
That is incorrect. Now, Hymans, he cited Hymans on the screen. Hymans acknowledges the December 25th of 274. He never says that doesn't exist.
Right.
His argument is that the Feast of Sol Invictus probably didn't start right away and came a little bit later. Yeah. But you're not arguing what Hymans is arguing. You're saying that there's no sources mentioning December 25th in regards to Sol Invictus to the 4th century. That is a lie.
Right.
That is just false, objectively incorrect. We know that Aurelian dedicated a temple to Sol Invictus on December 25th. Also, this is before any widespread feast of Christmas is in any of the sources yet, which we will get into. But I just wanted to point out off the rip, he is completely wrong. Not only that, the solstices are December 25th, obviously, is the winter solstice, and summer solstice is June 25th. There is archaeological data, I'm showing the papers on the screen right now, showing that Mithraeums, by the way, the Mithra is called, was central to Sol Invictus was central to their religion. Right. They dedicated the Mithraeums on solstices. We have an article about one of them happening on December 20th, two of them happening on December 25th, one in Syria, one in London. Then we have 3 of them on summer solstice. So the solstices were big to the pagans long before Aurelian came along.
So it's safe to say, Neil, that working backwards, as they've been building this Mithraeums, and they know that their summer and winter solstice dedication, celebration, it's a holy day to them, working back to the earliest Mithraeums, you can go ahead and bank on them being associated with this special day.
Associated, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't bank that they had a feast. You can't bank that they had some sort of feast on December 25th yet, which Hymans is correct about.
Right.
But
they may, but we can't bank on it.
That's the thing.
Right.
I was talking to Nothat about this. The overwhelming scholarly consensus in classicists think that Hymans is wrong. So all these people that are going around scolding people, Hymans says that the feast wasn't until later. That's unpopular.
Right.
He makes that argument. Most classicists are like, no, December 25th probably started in 274. Well, let me just finish this point.
Yeah.
When Aurelian dedicated a temple on December 25th, it's likely, because we see this in other places, when a temple is dedicated on a day, it becomes a feast right away. And we have multiple examples.
Right.
A temple of Isis gets dedicated, and I think it was on April 25th. Okay. And then they started Serapia on that day. This particular case, Aurelian dedicates the temple to Sol Invictus on December 25th. Then, not even a century later, let's say 60, 70 years later, there is evidence of a feast of Sol Invictus on the same day. Right. So you can make the case easily that the festival started on the day Aurelian instituted the temple to Sol Invictus on December 25th. Otherwise, you have a weird coincidence on your hand. A festival of Sol Invictus just pops up out of nowhere in the 4th century on the same day that Aurelian dedicated a temple. So most scholars are like, Hymans, what are you talking about? You're wrong, dude. This festival of Sol Invictus started in 274.
It's like
3rd century, not the 4th century.
Right. This is the same kind of faulty thinking or reasoning, in my view, of asserting, oh, well, the earliest attestation we have is that they're celebrating on, is it not Easter, or is this the summer solstice, the Easter date?
Easter, which is March equinox, spring equinox.
Right. So you have this equinox celebration, which is very, very early.
Yeah.
But we don't have a December 25th that early.
No.
But you can see they're celebrating on solstices and they're celebrating on equinoxes.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is it unreasonable to see how they are actually putting their special days pertaining to the celestial observations? That's what I'm trying to get at. Like, and you can work backwards like that and recognize that's what's happening.
We only know what the evidence tells us. The way the evidence falls down on us, 274 is the date that we get for any explicit mention of anything being related to December 25th for any god.
Yes. And as you of course say, obviously the winter solstice is part of the background that leads to this date being chosen, and there's a general trend towards cosmological symbolism and imagery in the 3rd century, which becomes just more noticeable in the sources, and more attention is paid to astrological connotations and so on. You have to be very careful. Again, the chronograph of 354 is a difficult source because the manuscripts are extremely late. There's always this danger of interpolation. Some of the dating issues are not very obvious. So I always say the earliest really secure reference that we have are these sermons by presumably Optatus of Miletus, who was a North African bishop. So that takes us to the early 360s, around the same time when Julian the Apostate talks about the 25th of December being a feast for Helios, the sun god. We have the earliest secure reference to Christmas. But
so they're kind of tied. They're kind of tied with the evidence.
It's a bit of a tie. I mean,
what you just heard there from the leading expert and authority on this subject, that's Notheth. He's the authority on this subject right now. One of the big three. Hymans is one. Notheth is the other one. And Notheth points out Hymans is wrong about some of the stuff he says too.
Right.
And then Schmidt, who also brings forth some possible calculations. All three, or Notheth and Schmidt, who bring forth these calculations that could have happened, are very clear to be cautious that we don't know for sure if these actually happened. They think it's likely that they happened. And not only that, the biggest thing that you just heard there is even if there was calculations being made by Christians, let's say 222, Julius Africanus, 235, Hippolytus, they made calculations in their text. They think there was some sort of cosmic balance between the solstice and the equinox, and they write that down and it just goes away.
Right.
There are other Christians in this time period who have different calculations.
Right.
Which means there were competing calculations happening.
There's no standard view.
There's no standard view. There's no feast. There's no liturgical calendar day until the 4th century. And as he points out, the most secure,
360.
The first secure reference. If we're going to compare Sol Invictus, 274, first secure reference. First secure reference for Christmas, 360s, almost a century later.
Right.
Now, someone might point this out. What about the chronograph of 354? Chronograph 354 has both.
Right.
The birthday of the invincible god, Sol Invictus, Mithras, whoever it is. It doesn't say Sol. It says the birthday of it says Natali Invicti, because it could be some sort of godhead. Then in that same text, it mentions Christmas. Notheth thinks this is an interpolation.
Right.
Notheth says the manuscript evidence is shoddy there. We shouldn't accept this. But he also thinks that the Invictus thing was there. So if we're going with the evidence on what we can stand strong on, you have Sol Invictus being dedicated as a holiday, as a feast, probably around 274, and then Christmas somewhere in the middle of the 4th century.
Yeah.
Between 350 and 360 is when Christmas becomes a feast, a liturgical day.
Okay, and just so our viewers understand, we're right now only talking about the winter solstice of December 25th.
Yeah.
We haven't even barked down any of the Nones of Janus. We haven't even gone down plenty yet.
Right.
And that's a whole different. We've already nailed it in other videos, but I just want to mention that.
And we like I said, you could watch our previous video that we did where we blow open the whole idea of January 6th, which is the Epiphany, which I'm going to mention in a second.
Okay.
Is the first official holiday of Christians celebrating the coming of Christ is the Epiphany on January 6th. December 25th sort of comes later, and they sort of tie those together in some traditions, especially in the West. December 25th becomes more popular than January 6th, but in the East, January 6th stays the way it is.
Exactly.
But the point I'm trying to make here is that even so, you can have Christians calculating the birth of Jesus, and two of them can say December 25th. 10 of them also could say different dates.
Yeah.
The Origin in 245. This is the end. This is the game over, game set match. Origin in 245, middle of the 3rd century, has a passage I'm showing on the screen right now, and he says in this passage that we do not celebrate birthdays. That people who celebrate birthdays are morons.
Yeah.
That there are no righteous men whose birthdays we should keep. That's in 245. Do you think that Origin would write that if Christmas was a celebration?
That's a very odd passage.
It's a very odd passage. Yeah. Tertullian also writes about being horrified. Tertullian, in the middle of the 3rd century, writes about how horrified he is seeing his fellow Christians celebrating Saturnalia, the calends of January, and Brumalia, and giving gifts. He even says, gift giving. I can't believe they're doing this.
Why would you think about this? Just period, socially. If you can't get your people to stop doing something, then how do you get them to stop doing it in a way that is wrong?
Right.
Adopt it, make it yours.
Yeah. And one more thing on that.
It's obvious.
So let's grant the calculations happen, and I think they did.
Mm-hmm.
So Julius Africanus and Hippolytus, they calculate, they think it's December 25th, and there's competing dates. There's also January 6th. Don't forget about January 6th. Yeah. Then Sol Invictus gets a birthday on December 25th in 274, and that festival gets more and more popular towards the end of the 3rd century. In the middle of the 4th century, Sol Invictus festival becomes very popular.
Right.
Now you have Christians sitting around in the middle of the 4th century going, well, which date do we go with?
Right.
Do we go with this April 2nd? Do we go with the May 20th? These are all dates that were proposed.
Right.
Do we go with the, there was birth dates in September that some proposed. There was birth dates there was tons of birth dates.
Right.
Why do they choose the one that coincides with Sol Invictus' feast?
Right.
I'll let the audience answer that question.
I'd like to ask you, why would Jesus turn water into wine in Cana? Why would he choose a miracle
on January 6th?
On January 6th.
You have the wedding at Cana, you have the baptism, and you have the Epiphany.
But like, seriously,
and then for
why?
For Dionysus' Theodosia, the night of January 5th, wine miracle, Epiphany.
This is a powerful point, and that's my point, right? Like, why do you have your dude do a miracle, and your Christian community literally attributes that exact same day to something that a deity that is before your dude was doing this already?
So here's how I think this all played out. This is a great point.
Yeah.
This is how, if you had to ask me how I think this all played out, January 6th is the earliest tradition for a coming of some sort of, maybe not a birthday yet, the Epiphany at the very least. There's an Epiphany holiday on January 6th, and that's there from early on. Then you get all these different proposals of his flesh birth. Mm-hmm. Like I said, there's dozens of them.
Right.
2 of them are December 25th. Then, after Sol Invictus becomes a feast, you sort of go, well, we already have the Epiphany on January 6th. And we have 2 proposals that he died on March 25th.
9 months.
And we give him we know the tradition says, by the way, there's a tradition. It's not common.
Yeah.
Moses for sure, and maybe Isaac is what Nothab told me. The tradition is that they died on the day they were born.
Right.
Not conceived on the day they were born. So at Jesus, they take this tradition as an apologetic and go, but we're not going to say that he died on the day he was born. We're going to say he was conceived on the day he was born. Mm-hmm. And that'll bring us on the same day as the winter solstice, the day that everyone's celebrating as this feast of Sol Invictus, and we'll make our day on the same day.
Right.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Like you already have a calculation there. I'm not saying the calculation didn't happen. I'm saying that because the calculation was there, mm-hmm. and you have these competing dates, you go with the one that is more popular. You go with the solstice one. It was a theme of the 3rd century in all cults, not just Sol Invictus, but it seems to be that solstices were very important for births. Plutarch in the second century, early second century,
yep.
says that Harpocrates was born around the winter solstice.
Right. So you got a long tradition.
It's becoming a trend that gods are born when the sun is at its lowest point.
And that's why, like, you don't need... It just so happens they land on the same day, and we aren't even factoring in the competitive nature between Mithraism and the Sol Invictus and Christianity. That is a factor that needs to be weighed in as well. But like, if it's shoddy in terms of knowing exactly how much influence on the ground in the real world it had, you can't imagine it didn't have some. So factoring calculation...
I wouldn't be surprised if Constantine had something to do with this.
Right.
Because
the
festival of Christmas appears post-Constantine. Constantine, who was a devoted to Sol Invictus, wouldn't that make sense if you're Constantine and you're trying to make all this fit? How do I get my Sol Invictus devotees and my Christian devotees to sort of come together? What's better than putting a holiday on the same day?
Right.
And then, like I said, I'm still acknowowledging that
his calculations are real. Right.
But I'm saying, if you're Constantine and Eusebius and whoever else, Bishop, maybe St. Nicholas is around. This is the early third century.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're going, well, by the way, I think St. Hippolytus also calculated that Christ was born on the solstices and died on the equinox. He did. There we go. That's what we're going to go with.
Right.
That's what happened. If I had to guess how it played out, that's how I think it played out.
So you're saying Plutarch's kind of starting this trend, maybe even encouraged by a previous trend of some sort, but he is really popularizing
it definitely is encouraged by a previous trend, because Haloa and Linnea are midwinter Dionysian festivals that celebrate his coming.
Right. His appearance, his manifestation.
So I think Epiphany. Plutarch is applying his own Greek Dionysian stuff to the Osiris Horus tradition.
Of course. And that
becomes a trend in the second century. And then by the end of the third century, it's everyone's doing it.
Right. If Jesus didn't end up landing on that day, it would have been odd.
It would have been odd.
It would have been odd that he wasn't born on this day or January 6th. Exactly. One of those two major days. And so this is why calculation is a serious thing, because we have examples of them landing on odd days that make no sense. And someone's doing some math to come to this.
Right.
But then you have them landing on the most gravitation, like the black hole days, which are going to suck in any deity, because the natural phenomena of the world itself is observing things. And why not have your cosmic deity match
and then they start to
the cosmos?
This is even crazier too. They start depicting Jesus in art after the 4th century. You start seeing Jesus with sun halos around him, looking like Helios. He becomes a solar Christ.
Mithras has the if I'm not mistaken.
I'm showing on the screen right now. Here's Christ on the left. Here's Sol Invictus on the right. They both have 7 rays. And guess what else? And so that you might go, that's a coincidence, Neil. No, because Julian in the 360s calls his god the god of the 7 rays. So somebody who made this mosaic knowingly gave Jesus the same 7 rays as the God of Julian the Apostate.
So this is, I mean, whether or not you even, if you want to play hypothetical, go, well, they didn't knowingly. Someone was influenced, and this caused the influence later for them to possibly echo this. Because when I read, for example, this is going way back into Yahwism, but Yahweh echoes the 7 thunders or some phrase that's in the Psalms. It's verbatim almost what you find in the Ugaritic Baal cycle.
Right. Not only that, Macrobius in the 5th century, early 5th century, 400s, early 400s, he writes the book called Saturnalia, and he talks about this god called Yahweh, who is born at the winter solstice.
Right.
So Macrobius is the kicker at the end of the day. Macrobius highlights how this was a trend. He says Dionysus was born at the winter solstice, Apollo, Attis, Adonis, Mithras, and even Pan.
He goes a step further than Epiphanius.
He says that all of these gods are part of a godhead, the supreme god, Yahweh, which is Yahweh of the Greek scriptures.
Right.
He says Yahweh is this godhead who is depicted on calendars as a newborn child at the winter solstice. If that doesn't show you that the trends of winter solstice births was popular in the 3rd and 4th and then 5th century, I don't know what to tell you.
And the only reason someone might go, why'd you jump down there to Baal and Yahweh? I wanted to make a point. They're culturally the proximity is culturally close. I mean, they're literally practically the same people. And I would say they are. They're Canaanites. You have the same mythology, same deities that are showing up. And I'm saying the same thing in the Roman Empire with the Christians that are converting to Christianity. They are kissing and breathing the same air as these Mithraists, as the Sol Invictus cult. And it's competing with it, along with calculations, along with their own observations of the equinoxes and the solstices. So
Christians, on the other hand, had already pinpointed December 25th as the date they thought Jesus was born, decades before any of this. I'll go into more detail in a little bit as to the reasons behind all of that, but Sextus Julius Africanus in the late 2nd and early 3rd century had already made that conclusion, and we have some early evidence that Christians were acknowledging it as such.
As I already pointed out, notice how he uses the term Christians have already pinpointed the date of his birthday. Yeah. This is a misleading, if not a lie, because we only have two possible calculations. None of them are explicit. The first one we have is from, well, I'll say three, okay? Actually, four total. Let me go through them all. The first one is from 205 AD, and it's the commentary on Daniel, and that one explicitly says Christ was born 8 days before the calendar, December 25th.
Right.
That one turns out to be a complete forgery.
Everyone agrees.
Everyone agrees, except for like very few people are like, well, maybe. But even those people acknowledge how shoddy these manuscript evidence. The first manuscript that we have comes in the 10th century, 7 centuries later, way after Christians was already.
It's only 700 years now.
And there's zealous scribes trying to fix everything, and then some of the manuscripts don't even have it.
Right.
So it shows that why would they forget to put that in there?
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal.
Note that was like, this one's completely forged. What about the commentary on Daniel? That's it explicitly says 8 days before the calends. That's December 25th. It says it right there. That's written in 205. What would you say to that?
Well, that's a tragically complicated case. The earliest manuscript we have is from the 10th century. It's a Greek text, obviously, and then we have a couple of other manuscripts that are later, and most of them have that December 25th date in them. But there are chronological contradictions between the way the text describes the birth of Jesus and his death and the way they relate to each other in terms of the number of years that Jesus lived, and the day of the week doesn't particularly match, and so on. It's all a bit dodgy, but the worst part is that the earliest manuscript, right before December 25th is mentioned, there is the word April there. And it makes no sense. And there is a reasonable argument to be made that maybe that's the remnant of the original date, and December 25th was interpolated.
Got it. This is like a 9 out of 10 chance it's not there.
Got it.
Like a very small chance that somehow a scribe forgot to write it 7 centuries later.
Exactly.
Anyways, that one, we can just cross that one off the list. People still cite that one, by the way.
Got it.
You'll see Christian apologists on Twitter citing that passage. It's so annoying.
Yeah.
He doesn't do it. He doesn't do that. He might. I don't know if he does in this video. We'll see. But the two that are most likely to be real are Julius Africanus in 222 and the Hippolytus one around the same time. There's two for Hippolytus. One of them is 235. But those ones are not explicitly writing Christ was born on December 25th.
Yeah.
Those ones give us the date of his death on March 25th. And then you have to sort of do some wiggling. You have to assume that this cosmic birth cycle is legit, that he was conceived on the day he was dead. Not born.
Not born.
Like the tradition of Moses says he was born the day he died.
Right.
You have to change the tradition.
Conceived.
Then apply a 9 month.
Does he say he was conceived?
No.
Okay, so you have to assume you were conceived, which meant then you can add 9 months to that.
You have to assume all this stuff. And then on top of that, you have to assume that 9 months was exactly 9 months.
Right.
Which is fine, because if we're going with cosmic stuff, they're not going to say 9 months in one day. However, it's not. There are no explicit sources in the 3rd century at all that say Christ was born on December 25th, which means for him to say that Christians already pinpointed this day decades before, that's very misleading, because other Christians in the 3rd century are giving other dates.
Right.
So it's not agreed upon. It's just a couple of possible dates.
Right.
That's it.
Now, is there a single date in that century where they are throwing the word 25th of December?
No.
So you have to.
Only for Sol Invictus. That's it.
Okay. So we have to assume. Okay, March 25th. Add 9 months, but it doesn't say that in the text.
No.
We're doing our own.
And by the way, the Julius Africanus text that we're doing that with is a lost text anyway. So we lost that text. We put it back together through fragments, and then we're doing all this stuff.
Okay.
So we don't even. It's the Julius Africanus one is very. It's possible that it happened. The data shows that he probably did do this calculation, but it's not. And Nothath is the one who wrote the article on Julius Africanus, and he's like tells people to be very cautious on citing this as a fact.
Even though there's indications that there are calculations happening, don't you think it's fair to say that we don't have any explicit mentions of a festival of Christmas until later?
Yes. No, you have to be very careful. Again, the chronograph of 354 is a difficult source because the manuscripts are extremely late. There's always this danger of interpolation. Some of the dating issues are not very obvious. So I always say the earliest really secure reference that we have are these sermons by presumably Optatus of Miletus, who was a North African bishop. So that takes us to the early 360s, around the same time when Julian the Apostate talks about the 25th of December being a feast for Helios, the sun god. We have the earliest secure reference to Christmas.
Is it safe to say that Julius Africanus, according to Nothath, is actually calculating 9 months from that, or is he just mentioning the March 25th and the day he was conceived was the day he died, and that's it? It doesn't mention he's also born on that day.
He doesn't explicitly say that. You have to do some So you have to do some mental gymnastics to get there.
And maybe later Christians did, your point is.
Yes.
Okay. But was it really going to take that hard? Is it really that hard for them to end up doing that calculation that lands on December 25th? You've already brought that up.
Another reason I want to bring this forth, another reason why Nothath and others think this did happen is because they also have John the Baptist being born at the summer solstice.
Okay.
So people are they're doing some sort of cosmic, and this is the trend of the 3rd century.
Right.
So they're following the trends that pagans are doing.
That's
the bottom line.
What,
the bottom line is that they're following trends that they're not in the Bible.
Isn't that funny? Wouldn't that be the position you'd go to? Look, December 25th, Christians are just following in the well-known trends of the Roman Empire and what they did in terms of gravitating toward winter and well, not just winter, but solstices and equinoxes, because they think their God is a cosmic deity. That would have been the easy go-to for me.
Right. And
I'd be like, yeah, they're calculating based on that. They saw the trend from others. The Bible doesn't explicitly say when he was born exactly, when he died exact year. I mean, you can say under Pontius Pilate, we got a window here, right? Because we don't know exactly when he was born. We don't know exactly what year he died. And we also don't know exactly where. I mean, there's so many details that we don't have the exact to.
And then on top of all this, March 25th happens to be the day of rejoicing for Attis. So
now you have that.
That's another thing Nothath says. They chose March 25th sort of arbitrarily.
Right.
There is no, so let me show you this real quick. There is no calculation that you can do to get March 25th from looking at 29 AD, 30 AD, 31 AD, or 33 AD. Let's say you thought he died in any of those 4 years.
Any of those.
If you find the Passover in those days, it's either April or March 30th.
At best.
For those days. So he didn't die on March 25th. They had to start with their starting point is already cosmic.
It's already cosmic.
It's already on the March equinox, the same day that Attis the rejoicing of Attis. They're already the way they're doing their math is it's rigged from the beginning.
Yeah. It's
rigged
matching
from the get-go
with the cosmic, which the Romans were already doing.
Right. So you're already starting with March 25th. The 9 months thing is very easy after that.
Right.
The thing is, how do we get to March 25th to begin with? That should be the real question. And I think they chose that date because of its significance.
So you're kind of doing what we did with Pliny and saying, all right, we see this Epiphany, we see this backwards January 6th, we work back here, we see Basilides is the next dude doing this, and it's very close in terms of miracle relation,
right,
gospel relation to this kind of Dionysian stuff.
The same way they take
You're
over.
saying Mithraism in terms of, or Attis.
Well, the Mithraism is the sort of the way you describe. Oh, you're talking about Attis.
Yeah.
By the way, Attis was a big figure in Mithraism too.
Right.
There's depictions of Attis as slaying a bull and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So point I'm trying to make is they're following the trends of this sort of henotheistic religion of this sort of Godhead, this invincible Godhead,
right,
who has all these cosmic. He's born at the solstice and he rises at the equinox. You see this in Roman religion, and Christians are sort of co-opting it and sort of purifying it for their audience.
Got it.
In reality, Roman temple worship was on the decline by the 4th century, and it is just as possible and even more probable that the pagans moved their celebrations to December 25th to compete with the Christians, who were a growing religious majority at the time. In fact, Pliny the Younger in the early 2nd century had already noted, potentially a little bit hyperbolically, that the Roman temples were being forsaken due to so many Christian converts. And Emperor Julian, who was emperor for 3 years in the 4th century, grew frustrated with the lack of Roman religious devotion to idols in his time and blames the Christians specifically for this pagan crisis of faith.
All right, number one, the first thing that I said that just standing out to me is that it's more likely that the pagans moved their date to coincide with Christians.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have a feast for Christmas before 274. So that makes no sense off the bat. So you're saying that you have a cover band. The cover band is the Christians. They're just he even acknowledges himself. In fact, before I even respond, play the next clip because I'm gonna show you how he did how he completely contradicts himself here. Go ahead.
Okay. So you already have 10 plus years of kind of Constantine showing his cards. He converts in that time. And I actually think, based on how it is described, that his conversion was legitimate. I think he actually believed, because part of that is that it was at great detriment to his actual political power.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, because this small percentage. Yeah, you're right.
Well, and remember, before that, the way that Diocletian got away with what he did is by literally making himself the god.
Right.
And the Roman populace were fine with that. The imperial religion was actually not something they ever had a beef with. And so if Constantine really wanted to grab at power, he could just make himself a god again. Or he could continue on in sun worship, which he was basically doing. He could continue on in Sol Invictus, in worshiping the sun as Saturn, as God. And that would have been completely both acceptable and understandable.
So here he's acknowledging that the Christians are just this little poor group and no one really cares about them. It's not good for Constantine to convert. That doesn't help him at all. The Sol Invictus is the big deal, right?
Right.
So he completely contradicts himself. On one hand, he's saying the Christians are growing and all the temples are being declined.
Yeah, we're the most popular.
Yeah, they're becoming the most popular. And then when it doesn't fit the needs to say that again, when he changes his stance. Now all of a sudden, the poor little Christians are just this little tiny group.
Yeah, and it would have hurt. Invictus is so big. It would have hurt Constantine.
It doesn't make any sense for him to be a Christian because they're just a little tiny group. But on the other hand, they're just taking over the temples and everything.
Right. And they want to copy the Christians, clearly.
Right, that's the point that I want to hammer.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible.
That makes no sense.
This is true. It doesn't make any sense. I'll tell you why. Number one, there was no feast for Christmas yet until the 4th century. So how could they be copying something that's not even a feast yet? You're telling me that Aurelian, the most important person in the world at that time, was reading calculations by Hippolytus. It doesn't even explicitly say Christ was born on December 25th.
Yeah.
And decided we gotta jump ahead of this trend before the Christians make a feast. Let's make our feast first.
Right.
What? It's almost impossible. The cover band here are the Christians. They're the small local cover band in some small city, Buffalo, New York.
Different cities, but
then you have Los Angeles, the big fucking the Beatles.
Yeah.
That's the Roman imperial
Sol
cult.
Invictus. That's the Constantinian. Yeah, it's a big deal.
Whoever's borrowing from who? Who's borrowing from who? Is it the big record label Lady Gaga borrowing from some random cover band, local band in Detroit somewhere? Or is it going to be the cover band in Detroit riffing off the popular trends of the time, which is the Roman imperial cult? And then the thing that ends this all is like the fact that you don't have anyone, like Origen does not acknowledge any birthday of Christ in 245. If Origen doesn't even know about Christmas, how could Aurelian know about Christmas?
Right.
So this is so stupid. The idea that it's the other way around and that Christians are pagans are copying Christians.
Right.
And let's just think about this. What is Sol Invictus? He's a sun god, right? Yep. What happens at the winter solstice? The sun becomes... He's
coming back up.
The sun gets
Epiphanius says this much, even when it's not even Sol Invictus.
The sun starts to gain more light after the winter solstice.
Exactly.
What's more likely, that a sun god would be born there,
or someone who wasn't a
or
sun
Jesus,
god.
a person.
Now you know
who
why
has nothing to do with solstices in the Bible.
Right. This is why astrotheologists actually go like, no, he was always a sun god surrounded by 12 in the zodiac. But like, you know what they do. But do you think he's just a celestial model of the sun in the text of the New Testament?
Well, he certainly becomes that way by Christians in the 4th century.
Exactly.
Because of the trends.
Exactly.
So again, this idea that it's the other way around is based off no evidence. As I mentioned, there's no feast for Christmas before Aurelian dedicates a temple in 274.
Again, you saw what he did.
It's almost impossible for it to be the other way around.
He tries to highlight the growing nature of Christianity becoming more popular, and there's complaints about them going, you're turning away from the local deities, you're turning away from the clearly civil gods that keep our society in order and not chaotic, right? Meaning they're so impactful in his view. They're not impactful in his view. And again, you
contradicts himself. He says they're only 10% of the population, and that no one really wanted to. It wasn't popular to give them anything. Constantine was actually going out of his way to be unpopular. Mm-hmm. That contradicts what you said.
In his work, The Origins of the Liturgical Year, historian Thomas Taylor says this exact thing when he states that it is more likely the Roman Emperor Aurelian placed Sol Invictus on December 25th to compete with the growing rate of Christianity.
What he just did there was Michael Jones inspiring philosophy level nonsense. He cited Thomas Taylor, born in 1924, died in 2005, from the University of the South, where he got his bachelor's in 1948. Right after World War II, he gets his bachelor's. He goes to General Theological Seminary, where he got his THD in 1969. No PhD. He cited a THD, who's a Episcopal priest, who's a professor of liturgy, organizations, General Theological Seminary, North American Academy of Liturgy, Episcopal Church. You just cited a priest as your history citation? Come on, dude. Really? You're just going to cite a priest and then say, he says what I want him to say. So there we go. We win. That's Michael Jones inspiring philosophy level nonsense.
And that was written when? When did that, like 1960 something, right?
Yeah, when he said that, probably in the 70s.
Again, it's that, what Michael Jones was initially, and this is just to make that comment quickly, when we were pointing out his flaw in Inanna, and then he got us on the chronology, as if that was somehow like defeating the whole thing, I'm still wondering if he changed his mind. But he quotes a dude from 1967.
And on top of it,
instead of focusing on actual experts in Samaria.
Exactly. And like I pointed out, there is no feast for Christmas before Aurelian dedicates a temple on December 25th. That defeats the possibility, it's not even possible anymore. It's barely even possible anymore, I should say, to be safe. Mm-hmm. It's barely even possible, let alone plausible, that the pagans are borrowing from Christians who don't have a feast, who only have two possible calculations and not even explicit in the 3rd century. Origen has no idea what Christmas is.
Yep.
Tertullian is talking about the midwinter festivals and how Christians are taking part in gift giving. And you're telling me that they're borrowing from the Christians?
Right.
What the hell are you talking about?
Your point about basilides too, like that being baptism only, and notice how Christians later start layering on a birth to it and layering on it's not early, it's later that you get this wedding at Cana connection, the birth connection. They start making this day so significant. He was baptized the same way he was born. They're doing all these like funny gymnastics.
This is what they've been doing,
because they're gravitated to the heavens.
It's parallelism is what Northad calls it. There's popular parallelisms happening in this time period for the winter time. Because it's the festive time of the year. Yeah. You have Saturnalia from the 17th to the 23rd. Then you have the winter solstice. And then immediately after the winter solstice, the Calends festival starts. And that goes on until sometimes January 5th or 4th. And it was actually supposed to end at the 3rd. Ovid writes about how after the 3rd of January is when the Senate resumes again. That tells you everything was closed down for the whole month of December. So it's not just Saturnalia that's influencing Christianity. It's the Calends, it's the solstice, it's the whole festival month of December that never changes to this very day. Mm-hmm. We still have the same thing in place today.
Others have tried to accuse December 25th of being the date of the Feast of Saturnalia, the Roman pagan festival honoring the agricultural god Saturn. However, much like Sol Invictus, our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late. Macrobius in the 5th century says that Saturnalia was celebrated 14 days before January, and keep in mind that the ancient Roman calendar at this time had 2 more days in their month of December than ours does today. This only comes out then to December 17th.
Okay, number one, the Julian calendar, December has the same amount of days as we do. So you're wrong about that. Even if you went to the pre-Julian calendar, that one has 30.
Keep in mind that the ancient Roman calendar at this time had 2 more days in their month of December than ours does today. This only comes out then to December 17th.
So I don't know what he's talking about there. He just blatantly got that wrong. It doesn't really have that much bearing on his argument, because we all know that December 23rd, December 17th, December 23rd is the dates for Saturnalia. That's not the argument that anyone makes. The argument is it's the gift giving, it's the merrymaking, it's the decorating with greenery, it's the lights and candles. That's all Saturnalia.
Right.
And we have evidence, I'm showing on the screen now, there's a papyri we found from the 1st century that acknowledges Saturnalia was happening all the way at Northumbria, where Hadrian's Wall is, the farthest reaches of the north. They were celebrating Saturnalia. Also, the Calends feast. Justinian in the 6th century, I think it is. No, I'm sorry. Theodosius in the 5th century takes the Calends festival. First of all, what he does is he shuts down all the pagan temples. He basically cancels all the pagan festivals, cancels the Olympics. But guess what? He continues to keep going. The Calends. That's it. It's not even a question anymore. The Calends is still going on all the way until the medieval period.
Right.
Maybe he's confusing it with the Calends festival, which I think goes on to the 3rd, right?
At least to the 3rd, yes. I think the Calends, they have a very long history, and I think later on you find at least one source where it goes on until the 4th or the 5th. I would have to look it up. The Calends are an important piece of the puzzle, actually, when it comes to accounting for some similarities between pre-Christian practices and what we do now, or at least what our ancestors did in the late Middle Ages, early modern period. I think we need to talk about the Calends more. I think they might be more important than Saturnalia, actually, when it comes to explaining some of those parallels.
So those festival, what he did is he took away they were honoring Janus. It was a pagan festival for the god Janus. But what Theodosius did, he secularized it. So he didn't make it Christian, but he said, we'll keep the Calends fest, but it's no longer honoring Janus. It becomes secularized. That means gift giving, greenery, lights, shutting down businesses, having everyone equal for a week, probably doing some sort of King of Saturnalia ritual. All that could have stayed because the Calends continues on. We have 11th century sources from Christopher of Mytilene, who mentions the Brumalia. They don't call it Saturnalia anymore. They call it Brumalia, which means midwinter. But he's in his source in the 11th century, talks about how they're all cheery and drinking wine during the Brumalia.
Right.
You even have John the Lydian, who talks about Brumalia in the 5th century, who he says, this what used to be a feast for Bacchus. He says they used to do all this festive stuff for Bacchus at this time of the year.
The gift giver, you mean?
That was in the 5th century. Oh, no, I think it's 6th century who says that. Anyways, the point is he's wrong about first of all, the dates are not the argument for Christmas. It's the celebration of it. And second of all, he says this.
Of Saturnalia, the Roman pagan festival honoring the agricultural god Saturn. However, much like Sol Invictus, our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
That is completely jargon, what you just said right there. You have Catullus. In fact, let me just play you a montage from my video on Christmas on the sources for Saturnalia. During the Saturnalia, when the rest of my household are enjoying the festive season, I allow myself to relax as well. Pliny the Elder.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
Martial, a 1st century epigram writer, shows how festive this time was even before Christmas was invented.
These trifles are suited to the festive season of Saturn. Accept them in good part, and may December pass pleasantly.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
If you give me a gift for Saturnalia, let it be something I can use, not something that will decorate my home and gather dust. Now is the time for cheerful giving and jest. Let slaves dine with their masters, and let the festive couch bear none but the free.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
Come and join our cheerful feast, where no one is too rich or too poor, and all drink from the same cup.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
It is now the month of December, when the whole city is in a bustle. Licenses are allowed in public. Everywhere there is a great noise of preparations, as if there were some real difference between the days devoted to Saturn and those for working.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
Now in December it is permitted to give delightful gifts with an open hand. And now you can speak what you wish. The time has come.
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
All of those sources are from the 1st century BC or the 1st century AD. I just gave you a whole bunch of sources that all have to do with gift giving, merrymaking. He says that they're all late? Where did you get that from?
Our earliest sources for Saturnalia come late.
Nonsense. 100% objectively incorrect. I don't know if he lied there or if he just doesn't know the sources. I'll let the audience decide on that one.
Brumalia, although a multi-day festival in ancient Rome devoted to Saturn and Kronos, comes in as a potential candidate. But Brumalia starts in late November and ends on December 17th, right in time to celebrate the day of Saturnalia.
Brumalia, he's wrong again. I mean, I don't know how bad he has to be wrong before people just notice he's not that good at this. Brumalia just means midwinter. So Brumalia doesn't end before December 17th. Mm-hmm. I mentioned John the Lydian, the 6th century source, who says that Brumalia was a feast for Bacchus at the midwinter.
Right.
I mentioned John of Mytilene, or Christopher of Mytilene, in the 11th century, talking about Brumalia happening. It's a midwinter solstice festival. It doesn't necessarily have dates on it. He's right that there was a Bruma in November that kicked off the winter season, just like we have our Thanksgiving kind of. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
They have this Bruma day. But the Brumalia itself was supposed to be the entire winter season, midwinter season, all the way until January. That's what Brumalia means. So I don't know where he got the date from, but it's not correct.
In fact, there is no evidence that December 25th was selected to replace a pagan holiday. And other sources of deities like Tammuz, Horus, Ahura Mazda, Mithra, Attis, or Dionysus being born on or around the winter solstice, those dates come well after the 4th century, and therefore long after we know Christians had already identified Jesus' birth on December 25th and were starting to celebrate it then.
His brain fell out of his head again. What is he citing? Zeitgeist now? There's never a source for Tammuz and Dionysus being born on December 25th.
Yeah. So I don't even know when. I don't know. Give me the source where they are.
Yeah, coming later than Christian. I don't know what he's talking about.
Maybe he's reacting to it and
so it's either a weird straw man that he's doing, or I don't know, trying to distract from the fact that in the 3rd century, Saturn Sol Invictus is born on December 25th,
right?
And there isn't a Christmas feast yet. I don't know if he's trying to distract from that and start bringing up all these random gods that did nothing to do with...
I would love to see sources where later they actually put this day for these other gods. I don't know them.
You and I know that Dionysus is associated with midwinter.
Right. In
his birth. But it doesn't give us an exact date.
Doesn't.
We have a Theodosia, January 5th.
Yeah, because that's Seneca talking about the nymphs. And there might be other accounts. And I'm looking forward to Anna Isabel's new article.
Also, you have Plutarch saying that he mentioned Horus in that thing.
Yep.
That's not late.
No.
That's before John's Gospel came out.
Exactly.
That's before Christmas.
And that's Harpocrates for anybody who's interested, which is Horus.
Born around the winter solstice.
Yep.
So I don't know what that whole clip was about.
It's not December 25th in the technical, like he wants that number.
But that has nothing to do with inspiration or influencing.
But I think your point is, get me those sources that you're saying are after 4th century.
Tammuz. Where did Tammuz
Where's
come?
Tammuz, December 25th, and all these other deities that are mentioned on December 25th after the 4th century. 5th century?
And by the way, he can bring that to me, and I'll just go, okay.
No, but it'd be interesting to see all of those, though, for me.
I think he's citing Zeitgeist.
Yeah, but that's why I'm wondering. I don't know if there's really ancient attestation to them putting those gods on the stage. It would just echo the growing trend. Your point of gravitating to the solstices and the
that's a good point too.
Great point. Hey, more evidence to what we're actually bringing to the table. But
I don't know why he brought that up. I didn't bring that up.
In 386, John Chrysostom says that Christmas was being celebrated on December 25th and describes it as a long-time tradition.
First problem with this is he does not ever say this is a long-time tradition. In fact, as Nothath points out, that by the time you get to Chrysostom, it's just being put into the liturgical calendar in the 360s.
So I always say the earliest really secure reference that we have are these sermons by presumably Optatus of Miletus, who was a North African bishop. So that takes us to the early 360s, around the same time when Julian the Apostate talks about the 25th of December being a feast for Helios, the sun god.
In fact, there's a passage that debunks what he said. The passage is from John Chrysostom, Theophany, his Epiphany homily. So he says, "The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon into blood before the great and glorious Epiphany day of the Lord comes. But why is it not the day on which he was born, but rather the day that he was baptized, which is called Epiphany? For this is the day on which he was baptized and sanctified the nature of the waters. Therefore, even at midnight, during this feast, everyone having drawn water, carry it home and store it. And they keep it for a whole year, since indeed today the waters have been sanctified."
Bro.
I know, this
gets right into what I've been doing with you,
Yeah. And then he says, "When then is this day called Epiphany? Because not when he was born that he became manifest to all, but when he was baptized."
Right.
This highlights that in John's time, John Chrysostom's time, the Epiphany was the big holiday.
Right.
Not December 25th yet. That grows in popularity later, and it starts off in Rome. So maybe in this time in Rome they were doing December 25th. That's a possibility. But where John is in Byzantium and Constantinople,
he's not.
And where he is,
they're doing
the
January
Epiphany.
6th, which is 5th, 6th, the night of.
So his homilies actually show that it's bigger. The Epiphany is bigger than Christmas.
That's a big deal.
And he made this claim in this video that John Chrysostom acknowledges this was a long time standing tradition. That's
if
not true.
anything's a long time, it's the Epiphany.
Right, exactly. And he does not say ever. I don't know where he just made that up. Because he does not. There's no indication that John Chrysostom says that December 25th Christmas is a long-standing tradition. That was made up. In fact, you can tell he made it up because if it wasn't made up, he would show it on the screen. This is what he does when he has something in the bag. He shows it. When he doesn't have something in the bag, he just says it and hopes the audience just accepts it. This is what he's been doing the whole time.
The Phalocalian calendar, produced in 354, had Christmas listed as a holiday on December 25th already. The first-hand sources suggest quite strongly that Christmas being celebrated on December 25th was at least an established tradition by the early 4th century within the Christian church.
Do you know why I'm laughing right now?
Why?
Because that same exact source mentions the birth of Sol Invictus. Dummy. You just brought up a source as if it's supposed to debunk December 25th of pagans. Oh, even by 354, they had its source where the birth of Christ is mentioned.
The Phalocalian calendar, produced in 354, had Christmas listed as a holiday on December 25th already.
In that same exact source, it mentions the birth of Sol Invictus.
So, yeah, okay.
So that's
do?
a tie at the end. And by the way, guess what else Nothath thinks? Nothath does not think that Christmas was in that original manuscript.
It's an interpolation.
He says the manuscripts are really bad.
So technically later Christians.
you have to be very careful. Again, the chronograph of 354 is a difficult source because the manuscripts are extremely late. There's always this danger of interpolation. Some of the dating issues are not very obvious. So sources we have are pretty paltry, right? We have this chronograph of 354, which is essentially a calendar which records the feast day of Sol Invictus for the first time on December 25th. But it says Natalis Invicti, so the birth or dedication day of Invictus, and then the other information is 30 chariot races. So this is all very strange, and since it's our earliest proper mention, it's hard to know what to do with it. There's a possibility there's some level of corruption or even interpolation here, because it's important to point out that we know that this calendar was made in 354, but the earliest copies that we have are essentially 16th century. I mean, there are a couple of fragments that are earlier, but it's just a very, very complicated state of transmission.
So you think that even the parts about Sol Invictus could have been sort of rewritten in a sense?
Yeah, maybe the word soul dropped out, right? That's one possibility. Maybe because somebody thought, hey, this is supposed to be about Jesus, not about soul, so let's remove the word soul, because Jesus is also Invictus, right? There is in fact one text that makes that case.
He thinks it did say Sol Invictus, but not Christmas.
That's even worse.
It's even worse.
So this source that he, the textual expert, should have double-checked.
No Theft says 360s is the first secure date for Christmas, where 274 is the first secure date for Sol Invictus.
So this is
that's what it all comes down to. That's what it all comes down to.
Oh, big red flag.
And so he brought up a source without mentioning Sol Invictus.
Right.
He dishonestly acknowledges that this source has Christmas in it, without saying this source also has Sol Invictus in it. And then he's not going to go as far as to say
the textual criticism part, which clearly just makes it it compounds it even worse.
It's so bad.
So where did the date of December 25th come from then? Well, there was an idea within early Christianity that if you were really holy, you would die on the day you were conceived. This was calculated mainly because the Old Testament would record the life of individuals like Moses and present round numbers without adding months or days for how long they lived. For example, in Deuteronomy 3:7, it says that Moses was 120 years old when he died. Well, the most holiest man who ever lived was Jesus. Therefore, the early church thought he must have died on the day he was conceived.
Notice how he says there's a tradition
where
people are conceived on the day that he died. You got the tradition wrong, dude. The tradition is that you died on the day you were born. So he puts Moses' Deuteronomy passage on the screen that Moses was 120 years when he died. Did it say Moses was 120 years conceived? On the day he was conceived, he died? Does it say anything about? No. There's no indication that
like
there's any...
If at best your point is, just correct me if I'm wrong, is that 120 years from the day he was born,
right, and that's
he would have been dead.
The Talmud, which is where this tradition comes from,
yeah,
says that Moses died on the day he was born.
Not conceived.
It doesn't say he was conceived. The Christians are the ones who changed this tradition.
Got it.
Just for Jesus. Nobody. There's not a single example. Yeah. Derek, there's not one example of anyone in any source, Christian, pagan, Jewish, doesn't matter.
Right.
Not a single source of a guy dying on the day he was conceived, except for Jesus.
Right.
He's the only one. There's no tradition. He just butchered the tradition.
So it makes you... And you're saying they're forced to do it for the solstice.
They're trying to get to the solstice.
Got it. Okay.
Because they're trying to work this out. But on top of that, even the tradition that there is, the Moses one, it's only Moses. It's not a tradition.
Right.
And I've heard people say Isaac might be included in that tradition.
Yeah.
But that's as far as we can go. Moses and Isaac.
Right.
This is not a long-standing tradition. This is not a common thing. So Julius Africanus, if he did make this calculation, he was twisting things. He was doing mental gymnastics to get Christ to be born and conceived on the spring equinox.
Yeah, to fit that.
It's nonsense.
Yeah. Going off of the evidence in the Gospels as to when the crucifixion was, which they believed counted out to March, and then they counted ahead 9 months, they got December 25th.
Notice how it's a perfect 9 months. Even though we have to just assume that's what happened. We don't have there's no sources. He made it seem like Christians were doing this calculation, and we have evidence of them doing it, and they wrote it down this way.
Right. 9 months after this, we decided.
And and like I said, we have to assume all these things check out, and then we go, okay, fine, they did it. And like I said, even if we grant that they did, we have 2 people who did it, Africanus and Hippolytus. Does that mean that all the Christians in the Roman Empire knew this? Yeah. No. And does it mean it was a widespread festival? No.
So let me reverse the question to you, okay? Let's leave Jesus for a moment because that's the hot topic right now for him. Why do you think Sol Invictus, Mithras, why do you think did they do all these calculations to say he was born on December 25th? Or
they don't have to.
Exactly.
All you have to do is go, well, he's a sun god.
Look at the sky.
You know what happens at the winter solstice? The sun, which is at its lowest point in the sky of the year, starts to rise again.
Right.
I wonder if we should make that the birth of the sun. Which way? Oh, no, they copied Christians. That's what happened. They copied Christians.
That's it.
No, the former logical statement of the sun rising, that can't be real.
Right.
They have to have copied Jesus.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is this something we today should hang our hat on? Well, the jury is out on that one. Nonetheless, no matter which way you swing it, December 25th was not chosen for pagan reasons. And the poetry concerning the light of the world coming into the world in the darkest time of the year in the Western Hemisphere is not lost on me.
Notice how he acknowledges the light of the world. If he's the light of the world, then the solstice has to make sense. But he doesn't apply that same methodology to Sol, the sun. Okay, I want to end on throwing him a bone. Does it mean that Christians are copying pagans or choosing this for pagan reasons?
No.
I agree with that statement. However, the trends of the 3rd century, that both pagans and Christians are both living in the same world, looking at the same celestial events, and living together, speaking the same language, living in the same cities, inhabiting the same, they have the same sort of world views as each other. They all love Plato, they all love Pythagoras.
Right.
It just follows logically that they're following the same trends as the pagans are. And that's it. And it's just that simple. This is how culture works. We don't have to talk about who's copying who.
Right.
If there is copying, it's the Christians copying the pagans. But I'm willing to say, look, we don't have to go that far. We just have to look at the evidence and go, there is a trend here. There's a trend. Sol Invictus gets a birthday on this day. There's also a trend that Christians want to make Christ compete with that trend. And how do you do it? You have him die at the spring equinox. You're already close enough. Look, you have the spring equinox. Jesus, according to the Gospels, dies around the time of the Passover. So you're already close enough to the spring equinox. Then you have this other Epiphany tradition, January 6th. It's already close enough.
Let's make his birth the same day as baptized.
Why not slide those dates over and get a cosmic Christ, birth and death?
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yep.
I didn't say anything about pagans there.
No, and I think that if you are competing, though, you are going to also likely imitate in a way of competitiveness to kind of pee on the tree, like I said about the dog. The dog pees on the next dog's tree to say, we have a better thing. And if you're trying to target converting these people,
right,
you need to do that. But the other question I have for you is this, and this gets into, again, we're leaving Jesus because we've nailed Jesus to the cross, okay? Clearly we've crucified him long enough here. Pun intended. But as far as Mithras goes, we know they are celebrating his birth and feast by this period.
Sol Invictus. Just to be clear on the name of the deity.
Sol Invictus.
But Mithras influences, and he's linked with Sol. There are 13 inscriptions that I'm showing on the screen right now that have two Mithras, Sol Invictus as one deity.
Right.
However, we got to be honest about the evidence and careful that there are a lot of depictions of them both being separate deities.
Got it.
So they're like a godhead. They're like Christ the Father and the Son.
Right.
They're together. They're like a dyad.
Okay.
So
just so we're getting this correct here, the earliest, and we cannot be certain, but the earliest, as you talked about, 3rd century, or mid-3rd century, where they're already establishing his birth. Sol Invictus is born on December 25th.
Yeah, by at least 274 AD,
right.
3rd century.
Okay. So then, as we pointed out, Mithraeum's, Sol Invictus is doing things with solstices and equinoxes.
These Mithraeums are being built on either the winter solstice or the summer solstice. They're being built and dedicated on those days.
Right. So is it a safe conjecture, and it is an educated guess, that they actually had already been celebrating the birth and feasts of that on this day?
Porphyry has a text about Mithras. Mithras is giving he's giving the divine knowledge to Zoroaster in this text called On the Nymphs of the Cave. And it says that souls descend and become mortals during the summer solstice. Mm-hmm. And then souls ascend and become immortal during the winter solstice. So he's saying when people die, their souls go to the summer solstice and they become mortals, and then they come back through reincarnation, which they call metempsychosis, through the winter solstice portal.
Right.
So you already see this solstice thing happening, and we have barely any text that survive about Mithras, and that's one of them.
Right.
So all the data shows so that you have the three temples, the 3 Mithraeums dedicated on the summer solstice, 2 of them on the winter solstice, plus that text from Porphyry, plus 274 with Sol Invictus, who's linked with Mithras. You could put it all together and go, whoa, solstices, and then by the way, on top of it all, Mithras is depicted all the time with the zodiac around him.
Right.
He is a cosmic deity. The zodiac is the 12 months of the year.
As is Ion. And
so this idea of him being linked to solstices is so obvious.
But so is Ion, and Epiphanius literally, as we've quoted him before, points out the time god. Here he is being a Epiphany, January 6th. But the way that Epiphanius even tied it back to December, talking about the 12 days.
12 days.
Like, it's all there, bro.
So you have Ion, you have Mithras, you have Yao.
Dusaris.
You have Yao, and then you have Christ and Dusaris, right?
Yep.
And they're all competing with each other, and they look very similar because they're competing with each other.
Of course.
I want to mention this, too. Pope Gregory, in the early 500s, early 600s, Pope Gregory in around 600, writes a letter to the bishop in London. And you know what he says? He says, in the year 604 of the Common Era, Pope Gregory I sent a letter to the Bishop of London, Abbot Mellitus. This is what he said.
After long deliberation about the English people, pagan temples of that race should by no means be destroyed, but only the idols in them. To consecrate these places, take holy water and sprinkle it in these shrines. Build altars and place relics in them. For if the shrines are well built, it is essential that they should be changed from the worship of devils to the service of the true God. So on the day of dedication, or the festivals of the holy martyrs, whose relics are deposited there, let the pagans make themselves huts from the branches of trees around the churches, which have been converted out of shrines, and let them celebrate in their own solemnity with religious feasts. The rites they once performed to the devil, let them perform to the true God. For there is no doubt that it is impossible to cut off everything at once from their rude natures, because he who endeavors to ascend to the highest place rises by degrees or steps, and not by leaps.
Do not destroy the pagan temples. Do not do it. Go in there and take the idol out, put a cross in there, sprinkle it with holy water, and make it a church. That is the doctrine that Paul himself laid out in Corinthians when he said, don't worry about meat sacrificed to idols.
Don't
go out to the world and mingle.
Yep.
This is what Christians have been doing. Saint Demetrius has a temple where he is, and he gets a legend attached to him where the goddess Demeter visits him in a dream and tells him to worship Christ. Saint George, who is the dragon slayer, his temple used to be the temple of Theseus, and they turned it into a church. Who's Theseus? He's a dragon slayer too. So the Christians are taking the existing culture and they're purifying it. This is the playbook of Christianity.
Bingo.
They do it to this day. Recently, the Pope came out with a new painting or something, some sort of cartoon of this young girl, a cartoon girl. And he said, this is the new mascot of the Catholic Church. It looks like an anime character. So now Christianity is adopting anime culture.
Right.
This is what they do. This is how they stay alive.
This is why I thought it was so successful. It mutates so well. But your point is so good. I interviewed Christopher D. Stanley. He was talking about in Paul's day, if Christians were to get sick, how do they handle it? In Paul's letters, because Paul, according to him, he's like reading these. There's no miraculous things like healings and all that kind of stuff that you see in Acts or some of these later stuff that's fiction. He's like, he would have acknowledged them and said, go to the Asclepian temple. Just don't worship the god. Go to the Asclepian temple, get the medicine from the doctor, because that was their hospitals in that day. Like, you needed to go to the Asclepian temple in order to see the priest who was the medical guy. I mean, this has happened throughout history too. Like, if you weren't a Christian and you needed to get help, and like the priest was the guy who had the medical background or something, you're going to go to him no matter what. I guess like that's irrelevant ultimately to your point about consecrating temples and stuff like that. But it is part of Christians' blueprint to go and take over and reconsecrate, rededicate temples, festivities, celebrated calendar holy days. Why not? We saw it with Nones of Janus. We're seeing it with Sol Invictus. I mean, look, and then you point out the whole the spring equinox. That's a whole nother question mark.
Another question mark. And then the John the Lydian mentions that he says early on that this was instituted by Claudius. And then we have a source about Marcus Aurelius adding a day to this Hilaria festival. So we're getting this in another video, but what I'm saying is the evidence in the scholarship says that the Hilaria festival, the death and resurrection festival for Attis, was set up in the reign of Claudius in the 40s AD.
Right, before Paul wrote.
Before Paul wrote and before the Gospels.
Right, and here you have a resurrected Jewish guy.
Do we have to question when Jesus died? Maybe we have to question when Jesus died.
Right, or at least if he did, again, like if we grant he died then, it just fits so much even better.
Then they're going, whoa, he's like Attis.
He's cosmic.
Let's write him that way, yeah.
Right. Well, Neil, any final words to Wes or anyone viewing?
I would say, Wes, do better. Or if you want to really like wash this all clean, have a debate with me on this subject. And then I can see that you're actually, honest about where your positions are, and you're not just trying to do some drive-by apologetics, hopefully nobody will check me type stuff. Because right now, that's what I think you're doing. I think you're just spewing nonsense to an audience that you know is going to accept it. Because you have that over your audience. They want this to be true. Christians want you to tell them this is all true.
That's true.
But are you being true to the sources and the data? I don't think you are. But maybe I'm wrong. Show me up. Let's have a debate.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, let's not generalize all Christians, because many Christians are on our side actually in agreeing with this data and know this is a faith thing. This isn't a die hard, we have the facts and everyone's an idiot if they don't see the evidence that's right in front of your eyes. No, it's a faith game.
Yep.
So in case you didn't know and for some reason your brain turned off and you aren't remembering properly, never forget, we are Myth Vision, and you have just attained
True Gnosis.